"You worthless little mouse! Scrub those stones until they shine like mirrors, or you'll find yourself sleeping in the dungeons tonight." The words sliced through her like shards of ice, each syllable a reminder of exactly where she belonged in this world. Ilara felt them settle into the familiar hollow space in her chest, where years of similar cruelty had carved out a permanent ache. She kept her eyes fixed on the grey stones beneath her knees, watching soapy water swirl around her raw hands as Lady Cordelia's silk slippers clicked past her head. She had learned long ago that responding only made things worse. Invisibility was survival. Silence was safety. The great hall stretched endlessly around her, its vaulted ceilings and tapestried walls speaking of power she would never touch, wealth she would never taste. She was nothing here. She had always been nothing here. The castle buzzed with frantic energy that morning, servants rushing past her, crouched form with armloads of silver platters and arrangements of white roses. The Alpha King was coming, the most powerful wolf in the 7 territories, arriving to finalize the alliance that would secure their borders against the northern threats. Everyone who mattered would be there to witness Lady Cordelia's triumph as she became his chosen mate. Ilara wrung out her scrub brush and moved to the next section of stone, muscle memory guiding her through motions she had performed countless times. The stones had been clean hours ago, but Lady Cordelia enjoyed finding reasons to keep the servants busy. Especially her. Especially when important guests were expected. Dawn had barely broken when Ilara slipped away from her duties, following the familiar path through the forest that bordered the castle grounds. The clearing waited for her like an old friend, peaceful in the silver morning light. She knelt beside the ancient oak tree, brushing away fallen leaves to reveal the carefully concealed patch of earth that held her greatest secret. The necklace was still there, wrapped in oiled cloth, buried exactly where she had hidden it 15 years ago. She never removed it from its resting place, never dared to touch the silver metal directly. But she came here every few days to ensure it remained safe, undisturbed, hidden. The dying woman had pressed it into her 8-year-old hands with desperate urgency, her voice barely a whisper as life faded from her eyes. "Promise me," she had gasped, fingers clutching at Ilara's small wrist. "Promise me you'll keep it hidden, never let them find it, never let them know what you are." Ilara had promised, not understanding what she was agreeing to, only knowing that the beautiful woman with silver hair and kind eyes was the first person who had ever spoken to her with gentleness. The woman had died that night, and Ilara had buried the necklace before dawn, carrying the secret like a stone in her chest ever since. She didn't know what it was, only that it felt important, sacred. The few times her fingers had accidentally brushed against the silver, strange warmth had flooded through her, accompanied by flashes of images she couldn't quite grasp. A great hall filled with golden light, a woman wearing a crown of stars, wolves howling in harmonious chorus beneath a full moon. She always pushed the visions away. They belonged to someone else, some other life that had nothing to do with a servant girl who scrubbed floors and emptied chamber pots. Dreams were dangerous. Hope was a luxury she couldn't afford. The sound of hoofbeats thundering up the main road sent her scrambling back toward the castle, heart hammering with the fear of being caught away from her duties. She slipped through the servants' entrance just as the head cook began bellowing orders for the welcoming feast, grabbing her scrub bucket and racing back to the great hall as if she had never left. The Alpha King's arrival shook the castle like an earthquake. Even from her position on the floor, Ilara felt the shift in the air when he entered, a pressure that made her wolf stir restlessly for the first time in months. She kept her head down, focusing on her work, but awareness prickled along her spine like electricity. His voice rolled through the hall when he spoke, deep and commanding, carrying the natural authority that made other wolves submit without question. She risked a single glance upward and immediately regretted it. He stood in the centre of the room like he owned it, like he owned everything, dark hair catching the light from the tall windows. Power radiated from him in waves, the kind of supernatural presence that spoke of bloodlines and birthright and everything she would never be. Lady Cordelia glided toward him in a vision of silk and perfection, her golden hair arranged in elaborate braids, her smile calculated to charm. She was everything an Alpha King's mate should be: beautiful, well-bred, politically valuable, the daughter of a lord, raised to rule at a powerful man's side. "Your Majesty," Lady Cordelia purred, sinking into a graceful curtsy that displayed her assets to best advantage. "Welcome to our home. I trust your journey was pleasant." Ilara scrubbed harder at the stones, trying to drown out the conversation, trying to ignore the way her chest tightened with something that felt dangerously close to longing. She had no business listening to exchanges between her betters, no business feeling anything at all about the Alpha King or his political arrangements. "Look at the little mouse!" Lady Cordelia's voice cut through her concentration like a blade. "Still crawling around on the floor where she belongs? Tell me, creature, do you think these stones are clean enough for His Majesty's feet?" Ilara's hands stilled on the brush. The hall had gone silent, dozens of eyes turning toward her like predators scenting prey. Heat flooded her face as she forced herself to look up, meeting Lady Cordelia's cruel smile with practised blankness. "Yes, my lady," she whispered, voice barely audible. "I can't hear you, mouse. Speak up. His Majesty is waiting." The Alpha King's presence pressed against her awareness like a physical weight, but she didn't dare look at him directly. "Yes, my lady, the stones are clean." Lady Cordelia laughed, the sound bright and sharp as breaking glass. "Clean enough for royalty, do you think? Clean enough for the most powerful wolf in the 7 territories?" She gestured elegantly toward the Alpha King, drawing his attention to the spectacle she was creating. "Perhaps you should test your work. Lick the stones clean, little mouse. Show His Majesty how devoted you are to proper service." Silence stretched through the hall like a held breath. Ilara's hands trembled against the scrub brush, humiliation burning through her veins like poison. This was her life. This was her place. On her knees, being degraded for the entertainment of her betters, while the most powerful man in the world watched her shame. She leaned forward, preparing to comply, preparing to survive as she always had. But before her lips could touch the cold stone, a voice cut through the tension like a sword through silk. "Enough!" The Alpha King's command rolled through the hall with supernatural force, making every wolf present feel the weight of absolute authority. Lady Cordelia's smile faltered, confusion flickering across her perfect features. "Your Majesty?" she asked, voice carefully modulated to suggest she had no idea what she might have done wrong. "The stones are clean," he said simply, his tone brooking no argument. "There's no need for further demonstration." Ilara remained frozen on her knees, afraid to move, afraid to breathe. She could feel his attention on her like sunlight through a window, warm and impossible and terrifying. Her wolf stirred again, restless in a way that made no sense, responding to something in his presence that she couldn't identify. Lady Cordelia recovered quickly, her smile returning full force. "Of course, Your Majesty. How thoughtful you are to notice the servant's dedication. Shall we proceed to your chambers? You must be tired from your journey." "Yes," he agreed, but his voice sounded distant, distracted. "That would be appropriate." They moved past her toward the grand staircase, the Alpha King's entourage following in respectful silence. Ilara kept her head down until the sound of footsteps faded, until she was alone with the other servants who quickly dispersed to avoid being connected with the scene they had witnessed. She gathered her cleaning supplies with shaking hands, the Alpha King's intervention echoing in her mind like a bell. No one had ever defended her before. No one had ever stopped Lady Cordelia's cruelty mid-stride. It meant nothing, she told herself firmly. He was simply being kind to a servant, showing the sort of casual mercy that powerful people sometimes displayed to demonstrate their magnanimity. But as she made her way back to the servants' quarters, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. Something in the air, in the castle's ancient stones, in the restless stirring of her wolf that hadn't quieted since the moment he spoke. That evening, as darkness settled over the castle grounds, she found herself drawn back to the forest clearing. The necklace waited for her in its hidden place, silent and secret beneath the earth. She knelt beside the oak tree as she always did, checking to ensure the hiding place remained undisturbed. But tonight felt different. Tonight the very air seemed to hum with possibility, with the echo of a voice that had commanded silence with a single word. She pressed her hands against the earth above the buried treasure, and for just a moment she could have sworn she felt an answering warmth pulse beneath her palms. The Alpha King was here, the most powerful wolf in the 7 territories, sleeping under the same roof where she scrubbed floors and emptied chamber pots. Tomorrow he would formalise his alliance with Lord Aldrich, claim Lady Cordelia as his mate, and reshape the political landscape of their world. And she would remain what she had always been, nobody, nothing. A servant girl with a secret she didn't understand, guarding a treasure that belonged to someone else's story. She rose from her knees and made her way back through the darkness, unaware that golden eyes watched her from the tree line, unaware that the Alpha King's wolf had followed an inexplicable pull that led directly to this place, this clearing, this exact spot where ancient magic hummed just beneath the surface of the ordinary world. The ancient coronation chamber deep beneath the castle had not been used for 3 centuries, its stone walls carved with symbols that seemed to shift and dance in the light of torches that burned with silver flame. Ilara stood at its centre, wearing the necklace that had transformed from hidden burden to blazing crown, royal power radiating from her in waves that made the very air tremble with recognition of sovereignty reclaimed. Every noble house in the 7 territories had sent representatives to witness what the official proclamations called a restoration of legitimate governance, though most understood they were witnessing something far more fundamental than political transition. This was the awakening of powers that predated their entire understanding of authority, bloodline magic that commanded respect from forces older than human ambition. I am Ilara Luna, rightful heir to the silver lunar throne, queen by birth to territories that stretch from the northern mountains to the southern seas, she declared, her voice carrying through the chamber with harmonic undertones that spoke of magic woven into the very foundations of the ancient keep. I reclaim what was always mine by right of blood, by blessing of the moon herself, by inheritance that cannot be denied or diminished by those who would suppress royal authority for their own gain. The necklace blazed with silver fire that filled the chamber, ancient magic responding to formal claim with manifestations of power that had been dormant since the original queens had ruled these lands. Light flowed through carved channels in the stone walls, creating patterns of protection and command that announced to every supernatural being within 100 miles that the silver lunar bloodline had returned to take its rightful place. Kieran stepped forward from where he had been standing among the assembled witnesses, moving with the fluid grace of an alpha who had found his true purpose in service to sovereignty that elevated rather than diminished his own authority. The mate bond blazed between them like golden fire, visible to anyone with the supernatural awareness to recognize bonds blessed by powers beyond ordinary understanding. I, Kieran Blackthorn, Alpha King of the Northern Territories, renounce all previous political arrangements in favour of the mating bond that connects me to my true queen, he declared, his voice carrying the weight of oaths that would reshape the entire political landscape of their world. I offer my strength, my loyalty, my territories, and my love to the silver lunar throne, accepting the role of consort to a power that commands my deepest reverence. He knelt before her with grace that spoke of genuine submission rather than political calculation, golden eyes blazing with recognition of sovereignty that transcended every alliance he had been prepared to make. This was not diminishment but completion, the fulfillment of destiny that his bloodline had been bred to serve across generations of forgotten history. Ilara placed her hands on his shoulders, feeling the ancient words of acceptance rise from depths of royal memory that had been suppressed but never destroyed. I accept your oath, Kieran Blackthorn, and bind our territories through the mating bond that supersedes all human law. Let it be witnessed that the northern and southern lands are united not through political convenience, but through supernatural recognition that answers to powers older than kingdoms. The moment she spoke the formal acceptance, golden light exploded between them with enough force to make every witness stagger backward in shock. The mate bond completed itself in a blaze of supernatural energy that announced their union to every wolf pack within 500 miles, ancient magic declaring their partnership blessed by forces that had guided the destinies of their bloodlines since the first supernatural beings had learned to shift beneath the moon. Lady Cordelia watched from the crowd of witnesses with expression that mixed fury and devastation in equal measure, her perfect features twisted by the recognition that everything she had schemed to achieve had been destroyed by the awakening of powers she had never understood. The political alliance she had orchestrated, the crown she had expected to wear, the authority she had assumed would be hers by right of beauty and breeding, all of it rendered meaningless by bloodline magic that commanded recognition from forces beyond her comprehension. "This is not over," she whispered, voice carrying just far enough to reach Ilara's supernaturally enhanced hearing. "There are others who will not accept this, pretenders, claim to authority that belongs to those who have earned it through legitimate means." Ilara turned toward her with the kind of regal attention that made ancient stones tremble in recognition, silver light from the necklace creating patterns that spoke of power preparing to defend itself against threats to royal sovereignty. "Lady Cordelia, you speak of legitimacy as if you understand its meaning. Tell me, what makes your claim to authority more legitimate than blood that has ruled these territories for 3 centuries before your family held any power at all?" "I was raised to rule," Lady Cordelia replied with desperate defiance, clinging to arguments that had been shattered by supernatural reality, but still echoed in her carefully constructed sense of superiority. "I was educated in statecraft, trained in the skills necessary to manage territories and command respect from those who matter. You scrubbed floors and emptied chamber pots. What could you possibly know about the complexities of governance?" "I know what it feels like to be powerless," Ilara said quietly, her voice carrying through the chamber with the kind of authority that made even enemies lean forward to catch every word. "I understand the weight of responsibility because I have lived without protection. I comprehend the value of mercy because I have experienced cruelty. I recognize the difference between earned respect and demanded submission because I have been forced to earn every moment of dignity in my life." She moved toward Lady Cordelia with predatory grace that spoke of royal blood awakening to its full potential, supernatural presence making every step feel like the approach of destiny itself. "You were raised to expect obedience. I learned to inspire loyalty. You were taught to command through fear. I discovered how to lead through strength tempered by understanding. Which of us do you think is better prepared to rule territories that require both wisdom and power?" Lady Cordelia stepped backward as royal presence pressed against her consciousness like physical force, her perfect composure cracking under the weight of supernatural authority that demanded recognition regardless of political preference. "The established houses will never accept you. The traditional alliances will resist having their careful arrangements overturned by someone who thinks ancient bloodlines matter more than current political reality. Then they will learn the cost of defying powers that shaped these territories before their families existed," Ilara replied with calm certainty that spoke of royal confidence backed by supernatural capability. "The silver lunar crown does not request recognition from those who have usurped authority that was never theirs to claim. It simply reclaims what belongs to it by right of birth, blessing, and inheritance that cannot be denied by those who prefer convenient lies to uncomfortable truths." She raised her hand, and the ancient defensive systems built into the castle's foundation responded with manifestations of power that had been dormant for centuries. Stone walls blazed with silver light as protective magic recognized its rightful commander, turning architecture itself into weapons that could be directed against anyone who threatened royal sovereignty. "Let this be understood by all who witness these proceedings," Ilara announced, her voice carrying beyond the chamber to reach every corner of the castle and the territories beyond. "The silver lunar throne has been restored. All previous political arrangements made in defiance of royal authority are hereby dissolved. All territorial claims based on conquest rather than legitimate inheritance are voided. The 7 territories return to governance that answers to bloodline magic rather than political convenience." The assembled witnesses fell to their knees as the magnitude of change settled over them like a tide that reshapes coastlines. Some knelt in genuine reverence, ancient bloodline memories, compelling recognition of sovereignty that transcended current power structures. Others submitted from political calculation, understanding that resistance to supernatural authority would bring consequences beyond their ability to survive. But all knelt, even those who harboured thoughts of future rebellion, because royal presence backed by awakened magic made submission inevitable for anyone who remained within the sphere of silver lunar influence. Kieran rose from his own position of respect, moving to stand beside his mate with the kind of protective partnership that spoke of shared strength rather than competing authority. The golden bond between them pulsed with warmth that elevated both beyond what either could achieve alone, ancient magic recognizing their union as the fulfillment of destinies written in stars older than human memory. "The coronation is complete," Ilara declared, the necklace flaring with final burst of silver flame that sealed royal authority with supernatural recognition visible to every witness present. "Let word be sent to every pack, every territory, every lord and lady who claims authority in the 7 kingdoms. The Silver Lunar Queen has returned to claim her birthright, and the ancient laws are once again in effect." Lady Cordelia remained standing among the kneeling crowd, defiance blazing in her blue eyes despite the supernatural pressure that made resistance almost impossibly difficult. "You may have power," she said through gritted teeth, voice carrying clearly through the silent chamber. "But power without support from the established order becomes tyranny, and tyranny, no matter how prettily dressed in ancient magic, eventually falls to those who understand how to build lasting alliances." "Then build your alliances, Lady Cordelia," Ilara replied with regal calm that carried undertones of anticipation rather than concern. "Gather your supporters. Rally those who prefer the comfort of familiar oppression to the challenge of earned respect. When you have assembled everyone who shares your belief that authority comes from privilege rather than worth, return to face the silver lunar crown in formal challenge." The offer hung in the air like a sword waiting to fall, royal confidence backed by supernatural power that had been awakened after centuries of suppression. This was not the frightened servant girl who had cowered under accusations of theft. This was a queen discovering the full extent of capabilities that had been bred into her bloodline across generations of rulers who had commanded respect from forces beyond ordinary understanding. "I will," Lady Cordelia promised, her voice carrying the kind of determination that spoke of enemies who would not simply fade away in the face of supernatural revelation. "And when I return, it will be with enough support to remind you that ancient bloodlines mean nothing without the backing of those who control the resources necessary to maintain power in the modern world." She turned and walked from the chamber with dignity intact, despite her public defeat, but Ilara's supernaturally enhanced senses detected the scent of desperation beneath her composed exterior. Lady Cordelia would indeed gather allies, would attempt to build coalitions capable of challenging royal authority through political manoeuvring and calculated violence. It would not be enough. The Silver Lunar Crown commanded powers that transcended political arrangements, supernatural authority that answered to forces older than human ambition. But the attempt would be made, and it would require the full awakening of royal capability to meet threats that combine traditional scheming with modern understanding of how to accumulate and deploy power. The coronation was complete, but the restoration had only begun. Ancient bloodlines had been awakened, but they would need to prove themselves worthy of the authority they claimed through strength that went beyond ceremonial recognition to encompass the brutal realities of ruling territories filled with wolves who respected power above all other considerations. As the witnesses filed out of the chamber, some murmuring prayers of gratitude while others whispered plans of resistance, Ilara felt the weight of the crown that had transformed from hidden burden to blazing symbol of reclaimed destiny. She was no longer nothing. She was no longer nobody. She was exactly what she had been born to be, finally free to rule with the combination of wisdom and strength that would either reshape their world or see her bloodline destroyed in the attempt. The Silver Lunar Queen had been crowned. Now she would discover whether ancient magic was sufficient to command modern respect from territories that had forgotten how to kneel before true royalty. 3 months after the coronation that had shaken the supernatural world to its foundations, Queen Ilara Luna stood on the balcony of her restored throne room, watching the sun rise over territories that had learned to flourish under the guidance of bloodline wisdom rather than political convenience. The ancient necklace rested against her throat like captured starlight, its silver chains catching the morning light and throwing it back in patterns that spoke of power earned through trials that would have broken lesser souls. The transformation of the 7 territories had been swift and decisive, ancient magic responding to royal command with the kind of efficiency that made political manoeuvring seem sluggish by comparison. Trade routes that had been disrupted by petty territorial disputes now flowed smoothly under Silver Lunar protection. Disputes that had festered for generations found resolution through royal judgment that commanded respect from wolves who understood the difference between earned authority and inherited privilege. "Your Majesty," Marcus Kieran's beta, who had become her chief advisor, approached with the respectful deference that marked all interactions with the Queen, who had proven her worth through strength rather than ceremony. "The morning petitions are prepared for your review. 3 territorial disputes, 2 trade negotiations, and a formal request from the Eastern Pax for assistance with border raiders who have been testing our defences." Ilara nodded, turning from the view that encompassed lands stretching beyond the horizon to territories that acknowledged Silver Lunar sovereignty with the kind of loyalty that was inspired rather than demanded. "Have the raiders been identified? Are they operating with political backing or simple opportunism?" "Intelligence suggests they're remnants of Lady Cordelia's coalition," Marcus reported, his voice carrying the careful neutrality that marked discussions of ongoing threats to royal authority. "Her attempts to gather support for challenging your coronation have largely failed, but some of her more desperate allies have turned to harassment tactics designed to test our response capabilities." The mention of Lady Cordelia brought a slight smile to Ilara's lips, not cruel, but carrying the confidence of someone who had faced far worse threats than political scheming driven by wounded pride. In the months since her public defeat, Cordelia had travelled extensively through the neighbouring kingdoms, attempting to rally support for what she termed a restoration of legitimate governance to territories that had been usurped by pretenders claiming ancient authority. Her efforts had met with limited success. Most established houses, faced with the undeniable reality of supernatural power that commanded respect from forces beyond political manipulation, had chosen pragmatic acceptance of the new order rather than futile resistance to bloodline magic. Those who had attempted to challenge Silver Lunar authority had discovered that ancient defensive systems responded to threats with devastating efficiency that made conventional warfare seem quaint by comparison. "Let them test us," Ilara said quietly, the words carrying the kind of certainty that came from royal blood awakened to its full potential. "Every challenge they mount only demonstrates the difference between their political scheming and the reality of power that answers to forces they cannot comprehend or control. She moved back into the throne room, where petitioners waited with the patient respect of wolves who had learned that silver lunar justice was both swift and fair, royal wisdom guided by understanding of what it meant to suffer under the arbitrary cruelty of those who confused authority with worth. The great chair that had been carved for queens 3 centuries ago seemed to embrace her presence, ancient wood responding to bloodline magic with warmth that spoke of homecoming rather than mere political appointment. The first petitioner, an elderly pack leader from the Western Territories, approached with the careful dignity of someone presenting a case to authority they genuinely respected. "Your Majesty, the dispute between our pack and the mountain clans has escalated beyond our ability to resolve through traditional negotiation. Both sides claim hunting rights to the disputed valley, and tensions have reached the point where violence seems inevitable without royal intervention." Ilara listened with the kind of attention that made petitioners feel heard rather than simply processed, supernatural awareness allowing her to sense the deeper currents of emotion and motivation that drove surface complaints. This was not simple territorial greed, but genuine need. 2 communities struggling for resources that could support both if properly managed through wisdom rather than force. "The valley in question," she said thoughtfully, accessing royal memory that connected her to the land itself through bonds older than human settlement. "It was designated as neutral territory during my ancestors' reign, protected hunting grounds that were meant to be shared rather than claimed exclusively by any single pack. Have you consulted the ancient boundary markers?" The pack leader's eyes widened with recognition of knowledge he hadn't expected a newly crowned queen to possess, understanding dawning that silver lunar authority was backed by connection to the land itself rather than merely ceremonial recognition. "The markers were damaged during the territorial wars, Your Majesty. Without clear guidance, both sides began asserting claims based on proximity rather than historical precedent. Then we restore the markers and re-establish the ancient compact," Ilara decided with the kind of calm certainty that made complex problems seem surprisingly simple when approached through royal wisdom. "The valley returns to neutral status under silver lunar protection. Both packs may hunt there according to seasonal rotation that ensures sustainability while meeting the needs of all involved." She raised her hand, and the ancient necklace responded with silver light that filled the throne room, supernatural authority manifesting as visible proof of royal decree. "Let it be recorded that the Western Valley dispute is resolved through restoration of traditional governance. Any violation of the neutral compact will be met with consequences that extend beyond territorial punishment to encompass the kind of supernatural justice that answers directly to royal command." The petitioner knelt with genuine gratitude, understanding that he had witnessed the kind of wise governance that elevated subjects rather than simply commanding their obedience. This was authority that served its people rather than demanding service, power guided by understanding of responsibility rather than mere capability. The morning continued with similar displays of royal judgment that resolved disputes through wisdom rather than force, though Ilara remained ready to demonstrate the supernatural consequences that awaited anyone who mistook compassionate governance for weakness. Trade disputes found resolution through solutions that benefited all parties rather than simply favouring those with political influence. Territorial disagreements dissolved before royal authority that connected directly to the land itself, making arbitrary claims impossible when confronted with bloodline magic that commanded respect from the earth itself. It was during the final petition of the morning that news arrived which would test the full extent of silver lunar power against enemies who had mistaken patience for vulnerability. "Your Majesty," a messenger arrived with the kind of urgent haste that spoke of developments requiring immediate royal attention. "Lady Cordelia has returned to the southern borders with a coalition force numbering nearly 3,000 wolves. She bears a formal declaration of war against what she terms the illegitimate usurpation of rightful governance, and demands trial by combat to settle the question of legitimate sovereignty. The throne room fell silent as the implications of direct military challenge settled over assembled courtiers who had grown accustomed to the peaceful resolution of conflicts through royal wisdom. This was no longer political manoeuvring or territorial testing, but formal war declared against Silver Lunar authority by enemies who had chosen violence over acceptance of bloodline magic. Ilara rose from her throne with the kind of fluid grace that spoke of royal blood, preparing to demonstrate why ancient queens had commanded respect from forces that transcended political arrangements. The necklace blazed with silver fire that filled the great hall, supernatural power responding to direct challenge with manifestations of authority that had been dormant for centuries but never destroyed. Lady Cordelia challenges the Silver Lunar crown to trial by combat, she said clearly, her voice carrying through the hall with harmonic undertones that spoke of magic preparing for war. Very well, let her bring her coalition, her political allies, her dreams of restoring governance based on privilege rather than worth. She will discover what generations of enemies have learned before her. She turned to face Kieran, who had been watching the proceedings with the kind of protective attention that marked a consort prepared to defend his queen against any threat that dared to challenge royal authority. The mate bond blazed between them like golden fire, ancient magic recognizing their partnership as the foundation upon which Silver Lunar power would stand against enemies who had forgotten why bloodline authority commanded such reverence. "Prepare our forces," she commanded, royal authority backing words that would reshape the political landscape of their world. Lady Cordelia has chosen war over wisdom, violence over acceptance, destruction over the prosperity that could have been hers under royal protection. She will learn the cost of defying powers that were ancient when her bloodline was still learning to shift beneath the moon. The messenger who had brought word of impending conflict knelt in recognition of royal command, understanding that he had witnessed the moment when patient governance transformed into the kind of supernatural warfare that would be remembered in legend long after current political arrangements had been forgotten. Queen Ilara Luna had been tested by peace and proven her wisdom through compassionate rule. Now she would be tested by war and prove her strength through the kind of decisive action that would either secure Silver Lunar dominance for generations to come, or see ancient bloodlines destroyed by enemies who had chosen conflict over the prosperity that awaited those wise enough to accept royal authority. The restoration had been gentle, marked by justice and wisdom that elevated subjects while establishing the reality of bloodline power. The war that was coming would be different, requiring the full awakening of capabilities that had been bred into Silver Lunar queens across centuries of rulers who had understood that sometimes peace could only be secured through the kind of overwhelming victory that made future challenges seem impossibly futile. 3 months of patient governance had prepared her for this moment. Now the world would discover whether ancient magic was sufficient to protect territories that had learned to flourish under the guidance of a queen who understood both the weight of responsibility and the necessity of strength when faced with enemies who respected nothing but power, deployed without mercy or hesitation. The golden light of sunset painted the royal chambers in warm hues that spoke of peace earned through trials that would have broken lesser souls, casting shadows that danced across walls where ancient tapestries depicted Silver Lunar queens who had ruled these territories across generations of forgotten glory. Queen Ilara Luna stood on the balcony that overlooked lands stretching to the horizon, her silver crown catching the dying light and throwing it back in patterns that seemed to pulse with the heartbeat of a kingdom finally at rest. 6 months had passed since Lady Cordelia's coalition had met the awakened fury of Silver Lunar power on the fields beyond the southern border, a conflict that had lasted mere hours, but whose resolution would reshape the political landscape of the supernatural world for generations to come. ancient magic unleashed after centuries of suppression had proven why bloodline authority commanded such reverence from forces that transcended ordinary understanding of power and dominance. The battle itself had been less combat than demonstration, royal power manifesting in ways that made conventional warfare seem quaint by comparison. When faced with supernatural authority that could command the earth itself, that could call upon ancient defensive magic woven into the very foundations of the territories, Lady Cordelia's carefully assembled coalition had discovered the futility of challenging forces they had never truly understood. The prophecy was fulfilled exactly as the ancient text predicted, Kieran said softly, joining her on the balcony where evening air carried the scent of jasmine and the distant sound of celebration from territories that had learned to flourish under governance guided by wisdom rather than mere political convenience. The Silver Lunar bloodline returned to power when the 7 territories needed guidance that transcended the petty squabbling of lords who had forgotten how to lead with both strength and compassion. Ilara smiled, her hand moving instinctively to rest on the gentle curve of her belly, where new life grew beneath royal protection. The next generation of Silver Lunar blood that would ensure the ancient bloodline continued into a future bright with possibility. "I used to dream of being invisible," she said quietly, voice carrying the wonder of someone whose entire reality had been transformed beyond recognition. Of moving through the world without being noticed, without drawing attention that meant danger for someone of my supposed station. "And now?" Kieran asked, moving to stand behind her, strong arms encircling her waist as the mate bond pulsed between them with golden warmth that had only deepened with time and shared trials. "Now I understand that I was never meant to be invisible," she replied, leaning back against his chest while watching their kingdom settle into the peaceful rhythms of evening. "I was meant to be seen, to be recognized, to shine with the light that comes from accepting who you truly are rather than hiding from who others tell you you should be." The transformation from servant girl to sovereign queen had been complete in ways that went far beyond political recognition or supernatural manifestation. She ruled now with the kind of natural authority that inspired genuine loyalty rather than demanded fearful submission. Her understanding of powerlessness making her uniquely qualified to wield power in ways that elevated rather than oppressed those under her protection. "Do you ever miss it?" Kieran asked gently, understanding the magnitude of change she had undergone in the space of months that must sometimes feel like lifetimes. The simplicity of anonymity, the safety of having no one expect greatness from you? Ilara considered the question seriously, thinking of the girl who had scrubbed floors and emptied chamber pots, who had endured cruelty with practiced invisibility, and believed herself worthy of nothing better than the casual dismissal of those who confused privilege with worth. That girl seemed like a distant memory now, a ghost of suppressed potential that had been liberated through trials that had awakened every capability bred into royal blood across generations. "I miss the safety of having no one depend on me," she admitted honestly, "the freedom from responsibility that came with being nothing, nobody, invisible to those who made decisions that shaped the world. But I don't miss the powerlessness, the constant fear, the way I had learned to hate myself because everyone around me insisted I deserved nothing better." She turned in his arms, looking up into golden eyes that blazed with love and pride and the kind of protective devotion that spoke of bonds deepened through shared struggle. "I don't miss being afraid of my own worth, Kieran. I don't miss believing the lies that said I was broken when I was simply hidden, suppressed when I should have been celebrated." "You were always a queen," he said quietly, hands moving to frame her face with the reverence due to someone whose strength had elevated them both beyond what either could have achieved alone. "The necklace didn't make you royal. My love, it simply proved what was already written in your blood, your bones, your magnificent soul." "And you helped me become brave enough to claim it," she replied, voice carrying the depth of gratitude that came from understanding how close she had come to living her entire life as a shadow of her true self. You saw worth where I had been taught to see worthlessness. You recognized power where I had learned to see only weakness. You loved me when I didn't know how to love myself." The mate bond flared between them like golden flame as he kissed her, ancient magic blessing their union with warmth that spoke of destiny fulfilled, prophecy completed, love that had transcended every obstacle placed in their path by enemies who had mistaken suppression for destruction. When they broke apart, the first stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky, celestial bodies that had witnessed the rise and fall of countless kingdoms, but had rarely seen the restoration of bloodlines thought lost to the ravages of time and ambition. The silver lunar crown rested easily on her brow now, no longer the overwhelming burden it had seemed when first awakened, but a natural extension of authority that had been hers by right from the moment of birth. "The territories are at peace," she mused, looking out over lands that stretched beyond the horizon to encompass kingdoms that acknowledged silver lunar sovereignty with genuine respect rather than grudging submission. "The ancient alliances have been restored, the defensive magic responds to royal command, and our people flourish under governance that serves rather than exploits them." "And our child will grow up knowing exactly who they are," Kieran added, his hand joining hers on the curve of her belly, where royal blood would continue the bloodline into a future secured through trials that had proven the enduring power of ancient magic. Never suppressed, never hidden, never taught to believe they are less than the magnificent being they were born to be. Ilara closed her eyes, feeling the gentle stirring of life within her, the next silver lunar heir who would inherit a kingdom at peace, territories united under bloodline authority that commanded respect through wisdom rather than fear. This child would never know the powerlessness she had endured, would never learn to hate themselves because others insisted they deserved nothing better than cruelty disguised as natural order. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if you hadn't found the necklace," she said softly. "If I had continued to live as a servant, suppressed and invisible, while you formed your political alliance with Lady Cordelia." "The mate bond would have driven us both insane," Kieran replied with certainty that spoke of supernatural understanding that transcended political calculation. "Ancient magic doesn't accept substitutes, my queen. We would have found each other eventually, regardless of the obstacles placed in our path. Destiny has a way of asserting itself, even when enemies attempt to rewrite the natural order." They stood together in comfortable silence as full darkness settled over their kingdom, the lights of distant settlements twinkling like earthbound stars that spoke of prosperity and peace maintained through royal protection. The girl who had been nobody, nothing, invisible to those who should have recognized her worth, had become exactly what she was always meant to be. "I love you," she said simply, the words carrying the weight of truth that had survived suppression, endured humiliation, and emerged victorious over every force that had attempted to deny the reality of bonds, blessed by powers older than political convenience. "And I love you," he replied, voice carrying the depth of devotion that came from recognizing his queen, his mate, his partner in building a future where ancient wisdom guided modern governance toward prosperity that elevated all rather than enriching the few. The necklace pulsed with gentle warmth against her throat, ancient magic content now that royal blood flowed once again through veins that commanded respect from forces beyond ordinary understanding. She was no longer the frightened girl who had buried treasure in forest clearings, who had endured cruelty with practiced invisibility, who had believed herself worthy of nothing better than the scraps of recognition thrown to those deemed undeserving of genuine respect. She was Queen Ilara Luna, sovereign of territories that stretched beyond the horizon, mother to the future of a bloodline that had proven its worth through trials that would be remembered in legend long after current political arrangements had been forgotten. She was loved, respected, recognized for the magnificent being she had always been beneath layers of suppression that had hidden truth but never destroyed it. The transformation was complete. The restoration had succeeded. The silver lunar crown rested where it belonged, on the brow of a queen who understood both power and compassion, who ruled with wisdom earned through suffering that had taught her the value of justice tempered by mercy. And in the growing darkness, ancient magic pulsed with satisfaction that spoke of prophecy fulfilled, destiny claimed, love triumphant over every force that had attempted to deny the reality of bonds written in starlight and sealed with power that commanded recognition from the very foundations of their world. The necklace no longer needed to remain hidden, no longer required protection from enemies who had learned the cost of challenging authority backed by supernatural power. Its truth was finally free to shine with light that illuminated a future bright with promise for territories united under bloodline wisdom that would guide them toward prosperity beyond anything achieved through mere political convenience. She was no longer nobody. She was no longer nothing. She was everything she had always been, finally free to reign with the magnificent strength that came from accepting her true nature rather than hiding from the glory that was her birthright. The Silver Lunar Queen had claimed her crown, and the 7 territories would flourish under her rule for generations yet to come. The Alpha King paced his chambers like a caged predator, every instinct screaming that something waited for him in the darkness beyond the castle walls. His wolf prowled restlessly beneath his skin, focused with laser intensity on the forest that bordered the eastern grounds. 3 times he had tried to settle into the ornate chair provided for his comfort, and 3 times his beast had driven him back to his feet, claws extending involuntarily. A supernatural awareness pulled his attention towards something he couldn't identify. "Your Majesty," his beta, Marcus, watched from the doorway with carefully controlled concern. "The evening meal is prepared. Lord Aldrich expects you in the dining hall." Kieran dragged his hands through his dark hair, fighting the compulsion that had been building since the moment he set foot on these lands. "Tell me about the local legends, Marcus. Ancient bloodlines. Anything that might explain why my wolf won't settle." Marcus stepped into the chamber, closing the door behind him with the practiced discretion of a man who had served his alpha through countless political negotiations. "The usual stories, Your Majesty. Lost treasures, forgotten magic, nothing that should concern someone of your lineage." "My wolf has never been wrong about sacred things," Kieran said quietly, moving to the window that overlooked the forest. "There's something out there, something old, something that calls to parts of me I thought were purely political." The beast within him lifted its head, golden eyes fixed on shadows that seemed to pulse with their own rhythm. Every fibre of his being wanted to shift, to run through those trees, to follow the invisible thread that tugged at his consciousness like a fishhook in his soul. In the servants' quarters below, Ilara startled awake from restless dreams filled with silver light and ancient voices. Her wolf stirred for the 2nd time in as many days, pacing anxiously as if responding to some distant call. She pressed her hand to her chest, feeling her heart race with unfamiliar energy that made her skin tingle and her breath catch. The castle had been in chaos all day, preparing for the formal negotiations that would reshape their political future. She had moved through her duties like a ghost, scrubbing floors and changing linens while trying to ignore the way every cell in her body hummed with awareness. The Alpha King's presence filled the ancient stones like smoke, impossible to escape, impossible to ignore. She slipped from her narrow cot and padded barefoot to the small window, gazing out at the forest where moonlight painted the trees in silver. Somewhere in those shadows, the necklace waited in its hidden place, pulsing with the same restless energy that kept her awake. She could feel it calling to her, stronger than it had ever been before. The formal dining hall gleamed with candlelight and polished silver, the long table laden with delicacies designed to impress the most powerful guest their castle had ever hosted. Lord Aldrich sat at the head of the table with practised authority, while Lady Cordelia arranged herself at the Alpha King's right hand like a living work of art. Her golden hair caught the light as she leaned toward him, speaking in the modulated tones of a woman trained from birth to charm and manipulate. I confess, Your Majesty, I'm quite curious about your territories in the north, she purred, her fingers trailing delicately along the rim of her wine goblet. They say the winters there are harsh, but that the summers are breathtaking. I do hope you'll show me the gardens when our alliance is formalised. Kieran nodded absently, his attention divided between the political theatre playing out around him and the insistent pull that drew his awareness toward the forest. His wolf paced restlessly, making it difficult to focus on Lady Cordelia's carefully crafted conversation. The Northern Territories have their own beauty, he agreed, lifting his goblet to his lips without really tasting the wine. Though I suspect you would find them quite different from these southern lands. Lady Cordelia's smile never wavered, but her eyes sharpened with calculation. She had noticed his distraction, the way his gaze wandered toward the tall windows that looked out over the grounds. In the months of preparation for this alliance, she had studied everything about the Alpha King that could be learned from a distance. His reputation for focused intensity, his legendary ability to dominate any room he entered, his supernatural awareness that made him nearly impossible to surprise or deceive. This man seemed distracted by something she couldn't identify, and that made him dangerous in ways that went beyond his obvious power. Perhaps, she said carefully, you would enjoy a tour of our grounds tomorrow morning. Our forest borders are quite ancient. Some say they hold secrets dating back to the first packs. Kieran's attention snapped back to her with such intensity that she nearly flinched. The forests, yes, I would be very interested in exploring them. Lord Aldrich beamed, interpreting the Alpha King's sudden engagement as enthusiasm for his daughter's company. Excellent! Cordelia knows every path and clearing. She could show you the old oak groves, the stream that runs year-round, the places where our ancestors once held their ceremonies. The Alpha King's wolf lifted its head at the word ceremonies, something ancient and knowing stirring in the depths of his consciousness. Ceremonies? Oh, nothing but old stories, Lady Cordelia said with practised dismissal, though her eyes remained fixed on his face. Legend says the old bloodlines once gathered in the deep forest for rituals we no longer understand. Mating ceremonies under the full moon, coronations blessed by ancient spirits, all very romantic, though quite impossible to verify. Bloodlines, Kieran repeated, the word resonating through his chest like the echo of a struck bell. What happened to them? Lord Aldrich waved his hand carelessly. Lost to time, Your Majesty. Wars, plagues, the natural ebb and flow of power. Only the strong survive, as you well know. The weak fade into nothing. Kieran's goblet stilled halfway to his lips, something cold settling in his stomach at those words. The weak fade into nothing. His wolf snarled silently, rejecting the casual dismissal of whatever called to him from the darkness beyond these walls. 3 floors below, in the depths of the castle where servants cleaned the remnants of the feast, Ilara's hands trembled as she scrubbed the great cauldrons. Her wolf had been growing more agitated with each passing hour, pacing and whining as if trapped behind invisible bars. When she lifted a heavy iron pot, power flickered through her arms like lightning, and the vessel slipped from her suddenly nerveless fingers. The crash echoed through the kitchen like thunder, drawing every eye to where she knelt among the scattered pieces. The head cook descended on her with fury, his voice rising in accusations of carelessness and stupidity, but Ilara barely heard the words. Her entire body hummed with energy she didn't understand, power that felt both foreign and familiar, as if something long dormant was struggling to wake. "Useless girl!" the cook roared, grabbing her shoulder with bruising force. "Do you have any idea what that pot was worth? Lord Aldrich will have your hide when he learns you've destroyed his property." She mumbled apologies and scrambled to collect the broken pieces, but her hands shook with more than fear. The wolf inside her paced frantically, responding to something in the air, some shift in the supernatural atmosphere that surrounded the castle like a gathering storm. In his chambers high above, Kieran abandoned all pretense of sleep and stood at his window, golden eyes scanning the forest with predatory intensity. His wolf had given up any attempt at rest, instead pressing against his consciousness with desperate urgency. Something was out there, something that belonged to him, that called to every instinct bred into his bloodline across countless generations. The political alliance could wait until morning. The careful negotiations and diplomatic pleasantries could be postponed for a few more hours. His beast would not be denied, would not be ignored when it recognized something sacred in the darkness. He pulled on his boots and coat, moving with the silent grace of a predator as he made his way through the castle's sleeping corridors. The guards nodded respectfully as he passed, accustomed to the restless habits of powerful wolves, never questioning when an alpha needed to run beneath the moon. The forest welcomed him like an old friend, ancient trees closing around him as he followed paths that seemed to glow with their own inner light. His wolf guided him deeper into the shadows, past clearings where moonbeams danced through the canopy, past streams that whispered secrets in languages he almost remembered. And then he felt it. A pulse of power so pure and ancient it stopped him in his tracks, golden eyes widening as recognition flooded through him like lightning. Sacred magic, bloodline magic, the kind of supernatural signature that spoke of royal heritage and destiny written in the stars. His wolf threw back its head and howled silently, every instinct screaming that he had found what he was looking for. Whatever waited in these woods belonged to him, called to him, completed something in his soul that he hadn't even realized was missing. In her narrow cot in the servants' quarters, Ilara bolted upright as an answering call echoed through her chest, her wolf suddenly wild with recognition. She pressed her hands to her heart, feeling the mate bond that she didn't understand pulse with golden light, connecting her to something powerful and dangerous and impossible. The Alpha King was out there in the darkness, following the same invisible thread that pulled at her consciousness. Tomorrow would bring new dangers, new complications, new reasons to hide what she was and what she carried. But tonight, for the first time in her life, she was not alone. The morning air carried the scent of rain and secrets as Ilara made her way through the forest toward the familiar clearing. She had barely slept, her dreams filled with golden eyes and voices that spoke in languages she almost understood. Her wolf paced restlessly beneath her skin, driven by an urgency she couldn't explain, pulling her toward the hidden place where her greatest secret waited. Something felt different about the forest today. The very air hummed with energy, as if the ancient trees themselves were holding their breath in anticipation. She quickened her pace, anxiety knotting in her stomach as she approached the oak tree that had guarded her treasure for 15 years. Her heart stopped. The ground around the base of the tree had been disturbed, not by animals or weather, but by careful, deliberate hands. Someone had been digging. Someone had found her hiding place. Panic flooded through her as she dropped to her knees, clawing at the earth with desperate fingers. The oiled cloth wrapping was gone. The carefully concealed hollow was empty. The necklace that had been her sacred trust, her dying guardian's final wish, had vanished as if it had never existed at all. "No," she whispered, her voice breaking on the single word. "No, no, no." She dug deeper, hoping against hope that she had miscounted the paces, that she had remembered wrong, that somehow the necklace had simply shifted deeper into the earth. But there was nothing, just empty soil and the lingering scent of power that made her wolf whine with recognition. Someone knew, someone had found it. After 15 years of perfect secrecy, her most carefully guarded secret had been discovered and taken. The dying woman's last wish, the promise she had made with childish solemnity, lay broken like everything else in her life. A twig snapped behind her. Ilara spun on her knees, heart hammering as she prepared to face whoever had discovered her here. The morning light filtered through the trees, creating shadows that danced and shifted, making it impossible to see clearly. But she could smell him now, that intoxicating scent of power and pine and something indefinably masculine that made her wolf stand at attention. The Alpha King stepped into the clearing like he belonged there, like the ancient trees had been waiting for his presence all along. He moved with liquid grace, every step controlled and purposeful, golden eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her feel stripped bare. In the daylight, away from the formal grandeur of the castle, he looked even more dangerous, wild, untamed, a predator in his natural element. "You," he said softly, and the single word carried the weight of recognition, of certainty, of something that made her blood sing and her heart race with equal measures of terror and impossible hope. Elara scrambled to her feet, backing away from the empty hiding place, from him, from the truth that blazed in his golden gaze. "Your Majesty, I didn't know you would be—" "It's you," he repeated, taking a step closer. His wolf filled his presence like barely contained lightning, power radiating from him in waves that made the very air tremble. "My wolf has been going insane since I arrived, pacing, clawing, desperate to get out here, to find you." She shook her head frantically, retreat stopped by the trunk of a tree behind her. "I don't understand. I'm nobody. I'm nothing. I was checking on—" Her words died as he pulled something from his coat pocket, something that caught the morning light and threw it back in brilliant silver flashes. The necklace. Her necklace. The dying woman's final gift, held in hands that radiated more power than she had ever imagined possible. "You were checking on this," he said quietly, holding the ancient silver up between them like an accusation. "This necklace that carries the scent of your fingers, your tears, your devotion. This treasure that you've been guarding like a sacred trust." The world tilted sideways. He knew. Somehow, impossibly, he knew everything. The secret she had carried alone for 15 years, the promise that had shaped every day of her life, the mystery that had haunted her dreams. Gone. Exposed. Held in the hands of the most dangerous man in the 7 territories. "Please," she whispered, the word torn from her throat like blood. "Please don't tell anyone. She made me promise. The woman who gave it to me, she was dying, and she said I had to keep it hidden. I don't know what it is. I don't know why it matters, but I swore to her. I swore I would keep it safe." Kieran's expression softened at her desperate confession, something almost gentle flickering in those golden depths. "The woman who gave it to you. Tell me about her." Ilara's hands trembled as she pressed herself back against the tree bark, caught between his supernatural intensity and the solid reality of ancient wood. "I was 8. She appeared in the forest one night, bleeding, barely conscious, beautiful, with silver hair and eyes like starlight. She pressed the necklace into my hands and made me promise to hide it, to never let them find it. She said—" Her voice broke as the memory washed over her, sharp and painful as the night it had happened. "She said, never let them know what you are." The words hit Kieran like a physical blow, his wolf suddenly going completely still with the kind of focused attention that preceded either flight or attack. "What you are," he repeated slowly, taking another step closer. "Did she say anything else? Anything about bloodlines, about heritage, about who you might be?" "I'm nobody," Ilara said desperately, the phrase she had repeated to herself thousands of times over the years. "I'm a servant girl, an orphan. I don't have bloodlines or heritage or anything that matters." She was probably just delirious, dying, saying things that didn't mean anything. "Look at me," Kieran commanded, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority that made submission inevitable. "Look at me and tell me you don't feel it." Against her will, against every instinct that screamed at her to run, to hide, to disappear into the invisibility that had kept her safe all these years, Ilara raised her eyes to meet his gaze. The moment their eyes locked, the world exploded. The mate bond snapped into place like a key turning in a lock, like lightning striking twice in the same spot, like the universe suddenly rearranging itself around a truth too powerful to deny. Golden light flared between them, visible and impossible and absolutely real. Her wolf threw back its head and howled with recognition, while his beast answered with a roar that echoed through dimensions she hadn't known existed. Mate. The word echoed in her head, and she didn't know if it came from her wolf or from the ancient presence that suddenly seemed to be examining her, or from him. But she felt it in every cell of her body, every beat of her heart, every breath she drew into lungs that suddenly seemed too small to contain the magnitude of what was happening. "No!" she gasped, stumbling sideways along the tree trunk, desperate to escape the golden chains that seemed to be wrapping around her soul. "This isn't possible. You're here for Lady Cordelia. You're going to mate with her, form an alliance with her father. I'm nobody. I'm nothing." "You are my mate," Kieran said with quiet certainty, pocketing the necklace as he stalked closer. "My wolf recognizes you. My soul recognizes you. The bond is real, little wolf. Deny it all you want, but that doesn't make it any less true." Ilara pressed her hands to her chest, feeling the golden thread that now connected them pulse with every heartbeat, warm and impossible and utterly terrifying. "Even if it were true," she whispered, "it doesn't matter. You have responsibilities, political obligations, a kingdom that depends on the alliance you came here to make. I won't be the reason you fail in your duty." Something flickered across his face at her words, a shadow of the political reality that waited beyond this forest clearing. "You're right," he said quietly, and the admission fell between them like a stone dropped into still water. "I do have obligations, treaties that must be signed, alliances that must be formalized. The safety of my territories depends on the marriage arrangement I came here to complete." The golden light between them seemed to dim, reality crashing back like cold water over heated skin. The mate bond pulled at her chest like a fishhook, demanding acknowledgement, demanding action. But she forced herself to step back, to remember her place, to remember what she was in the grand scheme of his political world. "Then you understand," she said, her voice barely audible. "This, whatever this is, it can't matter. It can't change anything." "Can't it?" he asked, but his voice carried doubt now, the weight of duty warring with supernatural certainty. "My wolf has never been wrong about sacred things, Ilara. And you've been guarding a treasure that carries the scent of ancient magic, bloodline magic. There are secrets here that run deeper than either of us understands." Her name on his lips sent electricity racing down her spine, but she forced herself to remain still, to resist the pull that wanted to drag her into his arms, into his life, into a fantasy that could only end in disaster for them both. "Secrets don't change reality," she said, proud of how steady her voice sounded despite the chaos in her chest. "I'm still a servant. You're still a king. Lady Cordelia is still the perfect political match. The necklace, whatever it is, it belongs to someone else's story." Kieran was quiet for a long moment, studying her face with an intensity that made her feel transparent. "What if it doesn't?" he asked finally. "What if the necklace is exactly where it belongs? What if the woman who gave it to you knew exactly who you are, even if you don't?" The question hung between them like a challenge, like a door opening onto possibilities too dangerous to contemplate. Ilara shook her head, backing away from him, from the clearing, from the truth that blazed in his golden eyes. "I have to go," she whispered. "Lady Cordelia will be looking for you soon. The alliance negotiations are today. You have a future to secure, and it doesn't include me." She turned to flee, but his voice stopped her before she could take a step. "This isn't over, Ilara," he said quietly, and the words carried the weight of a promise, a threat, a destiny she couldn't escape. "The bond doesn't care about politics or duty or what either of us thinks we want. It simply is." She ran then, crashing through the underbrush like a hunted animal, the sound of her own heartbeat drowning out everything except the golden thread that connected her to the most dangerous man in the world. Behind her, she could feel him watching, could sense the predatory stillness that meant he was deciding whether to give chase. But he let her go, and somehow that was worse than being caught, because now she knew what waited in the forest clearing. Now she knew that the mate bond was real and impossible and utterly devastating to everything she thought she understood about her life. And she knew that tomorrow and every day after she would have to watch him formalize his alliance with another woman while the golden chain around her heart grew tighter with every breath. The castle's oldest servant quarters lay deep in the forgotten corners of the ancient structure, where stone walls wept with moisture and shadows held secrets older than memory. Ilara found old Martha in the laundry chambers, bent over steaming vats of soap and water, her gnarled hands moving with the efficiency of 7 decades spent in service to the lords of this house. "Martha," Ilara whispered, glancing around to ensure they were alone, "I need to ask you something about the old stories, the legends that people used to tell before." Martha's hands stilled in the hot water, her weathered face turning toward Ilara with sharp interest. "Before what, child?" "Before it became dangerous to remember them." The old woman studied her for a long moment, eyes that had seen the rise and fall of 3 lords, taking in every detail of Ilara's expression. "What brings you to ask about old stories, little mouse? You've never shown interest in anything but keeping your head down and surviving." Ilara's fingers twisted in her apron, the golden thread in her chest pulling tight every time she thought of the Alpha King, of the recognition that had blazed in his eyes, of the necklace he now carried in his pocket. Someone mentioned lost princesses, bloodlines that disappeared. I wondered if you remembered anything." Martha's expression grew cautious, but she gestured for Ilara to move closer, lowering her voice to barely above a whisper. "There were stories once, before Lord Aldrich's father decided that old tales were dangerous superstitions that threatened his rule. Stories about the Silver Lunar bloodline, the royal wolves who ruled before the Great War scattered the old ways like leaves in a storm." "Silver Lunar," Ilara repeated, the words resonating in her chest with strange familiarity. "What happened to them?" "Destroyed, they say. Hunted down in the chaos when the Northern Territories fell to invasion. But there were whispers." Martha glanced toward the door, ensuring they remained alone. "Whispers that the last princess escaped, that she fled south with her infant daughter, carrying nothing but the crown jewels and a desperate hope that somewhere, somehow, the bloodline might survive." Ilara's heart hammered against her ribs as fragments of memory stirred, images of silver hair and starlight eyes, of a woman pressing something precious into her small hands with desperate urgency. "An infant daughter?" "Lost to time," Martha said sadly. "If she lived, she would be grown now. A woman of perhaps 23 winters, carrying royal blood she likely doesn't even know she possesses. The Silver Lunar bloodline was known for their power, child. Magic that could command the very stones of ancient keeps, wolves that could shift under any moon, bonds that blazed with golden light when they found their true mates." The words hit Ilara like physical blows, each detail matching memories she had tried to bury, experiences she had explained away as imagination or accident. The way doors sometimes opened at her touch without keys, the manner in which her wolf stirred at times that had nothing to do with the moon's cycle, the golden thread that now connected her to the most powerful man in 7 territories. "The crown jewels," she managed to whisper. "What did they look like?" Martha's eyes sharpened with sudden intensity. "Why do you ask, child?" But before Ilara could answer, footsteps echoed in the corridor outside, accompanied by the rustle of silk that could only mean nobility approached. They both fell silent, Martha returning to her washing, while Ilara grabbed a nearby basket of linens, using it as excuse for her presence in the forgotten corners of the castle. Lady Cordelia swept into the chamber like a golden storm, her perfect features arranged in an expression of benevolent concern that didn't quite reach her calculating eyes. "Oh, there you are, little mouse. I've been looking everywhere for you." Ilara's stomach clenched with familiar dread as she bobbed a respectful curtsy, keeping her gaze fixed on the stone floor. "My lady, how may I serve you?" "It's not about service, dear child," Lady Cordelia purred, moving closer with predatory grace. "I'm simply concerned about you. You looked quite distressed yesterday during His Majesty's arrival. I do hope you're not feeling unwell." The question carried undercurrents of threat that made Ilara's wolf pace restlessly. "I'm perfectly well, my lady, simply tired from the extra preparations for your honoured guest." "Ah, yes, His Majesty." Lady Cordelia's voice dropped to honeyed sweetness. "Such an impressive man, don't you think? So powerful, so commanding, the kind of leader who demands complete loyalty from everyone around him." Her eyes glittered with malicious interest. "I do hope all the servants understand how important it is that he feel welcomed here. No distractions, no complications that might interfere with the serious business of alliance negotiations." The warning couldn't have been clearer if she had drawn a blade and pressed it to Ilara's throat. Lady Cordelia suspected something, sensed some threat to her carefully orchestrated plans, and was making sure that any potential obstacles understood their place in her world. "Of course, my lady," Ilara murmured, grateful for the years of practice that allowed her to keep her voice steady despite the chaos in her chest. "Everyone wishes only for the success of your arrangements." "I'm so glad to hear it," Lady Cordelia smiled, but the expression was sharp as a winter wind. "Because it would be such a tragedy if anything were to interfere with matters of such political importance, the kind of tragedy that might require harsh corrections to ensure it never happened again." She swept from the chamber as suddenly as she had arrived, leaving behind only the lingering scent of expensive perfume and barely veiled menace. Ilara remained motionless until the sound of silk and footsteps faded completely, then sank against the stone wall as her knees trembled with reaction. "That one has claws," Martha observed quietly, her weathered hands never pausing in their work. "And she suspects you of something that threatens her plans." "I haven't done anything," Ilara whispered, but even as she spoke the words, she knew they weren't entirely true. She had felt the mate bond snap into place, had recognized the Alpha King as surely as he had recognized her. She carried secrets that could destroy Lady Cordelia's perfect political arrangement, bloodline mysteries that might rewrite the entire balance of power in the 7 territories. "Sometimes doing nothing is the most dangerous thing of all," Martha said softly, "especially when you carry something that others would kill to possess or destroy." That evening, after the castle had settled into the quiet rhythms of night, Ilara made her way to the archives that lay deep beneath the great hall. The forgotten chambers held scrolls and documents dating back centuries, records that Lord Aldrich's family had deemed too ancient to bother preserving properly. Dust motes danced in the flickering candlelight as she searched through crumbling texts, looking for any mention of the silver lunar bloodline, any clue that might explain the visions that had been growing stronger since the necklace's discovery. Her fingers trembled as she unrolled a scroll that bore the faded insignia of royal scribes, its contents written in the formal language of court historians. The text spoke of ancient coronations, of queens who commanded both wolf and magic with equal skill, of a bloodline blessed by the moon herself with power that transcended ordinary understanding. The silver lunar queens were known for their ability to bond with mates across impossible distances, she read in the wavering candlelight. Their wolves could recognize their true partners even before first meeting, drawn by supernatural instincts that superseded all political or social barriers. The mating bonds of the silver lunar bloodline blazed with golden light, visible to any with the eyes to see, marking the union as blessed by forces older than memory. The words blurred as tears gathered in her eyes, each detail matching her own experiences with terrifying accuracy. The way her wolf had stirred when the Alpha King arrived, the golden light that had flared between them in the forest clearing, the bond that pulled at her chest with every breath despite the impossible nature of their connection. She found more references scattered through the ancient texts, descriptions of a crown necklace that served as both royal insignia and focus for bloodline power, accounts of queens who could command castle defences through their connection to ancient magical foundations, stories of a final desperate flight when the Northern Territories fell, a last queen carrying her infant heir into exile with nothing but hope and determination to keep the bloodline alive. The candle flickered as footsteps echoed in the corridor above, reminding her that discovery here would bring questions she couldn't answer. She carefully rolled the scrolls back into their proper places, but not before memorizing every detail that might help her understand what was happening to her, what she might be, what the dying woman with silver hair might have known when she pressed an ancient treasure into the hands of a frightened child. As she made her way back through the darkened castle, the mate bond pulsed with sudden intensity, drawing her attention toward the noble quarters where the Alpha King lay sleepless in chambers too far away and yet impossibly close. She could sense his restlessness, feel the echo of his wolf pacing with the same desperate energy that drove her own beast to claw at the barriers of her control. Tomorrow would bring new dangers, as Lady Cordelia's suspicions sharpened into active threat. The alliance negotiations would continue, political wheels would turn, and she would be expected to remain invisible, while her very existence threatened to destroy the careful balance that kept their world stable. But tonight, in the darkness of her small chamber, she allowed herself to remember the golden light that had blazed between them, the recognition that had felt like coming home after a lifetime of wandering lost. Whatever secrets her bloodline carried, whatever power ran in her veins, whatever destiny waited in the shadows of political intrigue, she was no longer entirely alone. The mate bond hummed with quiet promise, a golden thread connecting her to someone who had looked into her eyes and seen not a servant, not a nobody, but something precious enough to fight for, even if that fight might destroy them both. The grand feast hall gleamed with polished silver and flickering candles, transformed into a stage worthy of the most important political alliance in a generation. Noble houses from across the Southern Territories had gathered to witness the formal negotiations between Lord Aldrich and the Alpha King, their finest silks and jewels creating a tapestry of wealth and power that spoke of bloodlines and birthright. At the centre of it all, Lady Cordelia held court like a golden goddess, her laughter musical as she charmed the assembled lords with practised grace. Ilara moved through the celebration like a shadow, refilling wine goblets and clearing plates while trying to remain invisible among the grandeur that would never belong to her. The mate bond pulled at her chest with every breath, a constant reminder of the Alpha King's presence at the high table, close enough to touch and impossibly distant across the chasm of social hierarchy. She had perfected the art of not looking at him directly, keeping her eyes fixed on her duties while supernatural awareness tracked his every movement, every shift in posture, every moment when his golden gaze swept the hall as if searching for something he couldn't find. The bond between them hummed with tension that made her hands tremble and her wolf pace restlessly beneath her carefully controlled surface. "You there, servant girl." Lady Cordelia's voice cut through the warm buzz of conversation like a blade through silk, drawing every eye in the hall toward where Ilara stood, frozen beside a table laden with delicacies. "Come here. I have need of your services." Ilara's blood turned to ice as she recognized the predatory gleam in Lady Cordelia's perfect blue eyes, the smile that promised cruelty disguised as entertainment. This was it. The moment Lady Cordelia had been planning since she noticed the Alpha King's distraction, the trap that would eliminate any perceived threat to her political triumph. "Yes, my lady," Ilara whispered, moving toward the high table where the most powerful people in 7 territories watched with the idle curiosity of predators observing prey. The Alpha King's presence burned against her awareness like flame, his supernatural intensity making it difficult to breathe as she approached the epicenter of noble power. "Tell me, dear child," Lady Cordelia purred, her voice carrying clearly through the suddenly quiet hall. "Have you been in my chambers recently? I seem to be missing a rather valuable ring, a family heirloom with sapphires that belonged to my grandmother." The accusation hit the assembled nobles like a stone dropped into still water, shock rippling through the crowd as they processed the implication. Theft, the most serious charge that could be levelled against a servant, punishable by imprisonment, banishment, or worse, depending on the whim of the accuser. "No, my lady," Ilara said quietly, proud that her voice remained steady, despite the terror clawing at her throat. "I have not been in your chambers. I would never take anything that didn't belong to me." "How curious," Lady Cordelia mused, rising from her chair with fluid grace that drew every male eye in the hall. "Because the ring disappeared shortly after you delivered fresh linens to the noble quarters, and you were seen leaving my chambers just yesterday afternoon." It was a lie, carefully constructed and impossible to disprove. Ilara felt the trap closing around her like iron bars, the weight of noble attention pressing down until she could barely stand upright. But something in her core, some strength she hadn't known she possessed, refused to break under the pressure. "I delivered linens to the corridor," she said with quiet dignity that surprised even herself. "I did not enter your private chambers, my lady. Perhaps you have simply misplaced the ring, and it will turn up when you search more carefully." Gasps echoed through the hall at her words, shock that a servant would dare suggest a noble lady had been careless with her possessions. Lady Cordelia's eyes blazed with fury at the subtle defiance, her perfect composure cracking just enough to reveal the vicious calculation beneath. "How dare you imply that I am mistaken?" she hissed, her voice rising to carry to every corner of the silent hall. "Guards, search her quarters immediately, strip her if necessary. I want that ring found, and I want this little thief punished as an example to anyone else who might think to steal from their betters." The hall erupted in murmurs of excitement and shock as armed guards moved toward Ilara, their faces grim with the certainty of duty. This was entertainment of the highest order, drama to enliven a political feast, the spectacle of justice being served upon someone too low to matter in the grand scheme of noble concerns. But before the guards could reach her, a voice cut through the chaos with the force of absolute authority. "Stop!" The Alpha King's command rolled through the hall like thunder, supernatural power backing the single word with enough force to make every wolf present feel the weight of dominance pressing against their consciousness. Guards froze mid-step. Nobles fell silent with the suddenness of prey, animals sensing an apex predator, and even Lady Cordelia's perfect composure wavered under the intensity of his golden gaze. "Your Majesty?" Lord Aldrich ventured carefully, clearly confused by the Alpha King's intervention in what should have been a simple matter of household discipline. Kieran rose from his chair with liquid grace, power radiating from him in waves that made the very air tremble. His wolf prowled just beneath the surface, barely contained rage making his presence even more dangerous than usual. "I said stop. Lady Cordelia has made a serious accusation, one that deserves proper investigation rather than immediate punishment." "Of course, Your Majesty," Lady Cordelia recovered quickly, her smile returning with calculated sweetness. "Though I hardly think investigation is necessary when the evidence is so clear. The servant was in my quarters, the ring is missing, and her kind are naturally given to taking things that don't belong to them." "Her kind," Kieran repeated, his voice deceptively mild, while golden fire blazed in his eyes. "And what kind would that be, Lady Cordelia?" The question hung in the air like a sword waiting to fall, dangerous in ways that made the assembled nobles shift uncomfortably in their seats. Lady Cordelia's flush deepened as she realised she had revealed more of her prejudice than was politically wise in front of a man whose support she desperately needed. "I simply meant servants, Your Majesty. People of lesser breeding, who sometimes struggle with temptation when surrounded by valuable items they could never hope to own legitimately." Ilara felt the words slice through her like silver blades, each casual dismissal of her worth a reminder of exactly how the noble world saw her. But beneath the familiar pain, something else stirred. Anger, clean and bright and absolutely foreign to her carefully cultivated invisibility. Her wolf lifted its head with the first hint of defiance she had felt in 15 years of serving in this castle. "I did not steal anything," she said clearly, her voice carrying further than it ever had before, reaching every corner of the silent hall with quiet dignity that made several nobles lean forward with sudden interest. "I have served in this castle for 15 years without a single mark against my honour. I will not begin stealing now, no matter what Lady Cordelia chooses to believe about people of my breeding." The last word carried just enough emphasis to make it clear she understood exactly what Lady Cordelia had meant, turning the insult back on its speaker with subtle skill that drew murmurs of surprise from the watching nobles. This was not the behaviour they expected from a servant, this quiet strength that refused to bow completely under the weight of accusation and social pressure. "Well said." Kieran's voice carried approval that made the mate bond flare with warmth in her chest. "I suggest we search Lady Cordelia's chambers thoroughly before taking any action against the accused. If the ring has truly been stolen, evidence will be found. If it has simply been misplaced—" He let the implication hang unfinished, a clear suggestion that hasty accusations might be reconsidered. Lady Cordelia's face went white with fury at the implication that she might have been mistaken, that her word might not be accepted without question, that a servant's dignity might be worth defending. "Your Majesty, surely you're not suggesting that I would falsely accuse—" "I'm suggesting that justice requires proof before punishment," Kieran said smoothly, settling back into his chair with predatory grace. "After all, we wouldn't want any complications to arise from hasty decisions made without proper evidence, particularly during such important negotiations." The warning was subtle but unmistakable. Lady Cordelia needed his alliance more than he needed hers, and they both knew it. Political reality crashed over her perfect features like cold water, forcing her to swallow her rage and calculate the cost of pressing her attack against someone the Alpha King seemed inclined to protect. "Of course, Your Majesty," she said through gritted teeth, "though I'm quite certain the search will vindicate my concerns about this particular servant's reliability." The guards searched Lady Cordelia's chambers with thorough efficiency, returning to the hall empty-handed and clearly uncomfortable with the task they had been given. No ring was found, no evidence of theft discovered, nothing to support the accusation that had been made with such certainty before the assembled nobility. "It seems," Kieran observed with deceptive mildness, "that the ring was not stolen after all. Perhaps it was simply overlooked in some jewellery box or drawer that wasn't thoroughly searched during Lady Cordelia's initial investigation." The assembled nobles murmured with the kind of polite agreement that meant everyone understood exactly what had transpired, even if no one would speak it aloud. Lady Cordelia had attempted to destroy a servant on false charges, been publicly corrected by the Alpha King, and forced to retreat without achieving her goal. It was a political humiliation that would be whispered about in noble circles for months. "Perhaps," Lady Cordelia agreed tightly, her perfect composure barely containing the fury that blazed in her blue eyes. "Mistakes do happen after all. I'm sure the servant is simply grateful that the truth has been revealed." Ilara met her gaze steadily, seeing the promise of future retribution written clearly in those cold depths. This was not over. If anything, Lady Cordelia's public failure had only sharpened her determination to eliminate the threat she perceived, made her more dangerous rather than less. "Very grateful, my lady," Ilara said quietly, offering a respectful curtsy that contained just enough dignity to make it clear she had not been broken by the experience. Truth has a way of revealing itself, regardless of who attempts to hide it. The words carried layers of meaning that made several nobles exchange glances, recognition of something more complex than simple servant gratitude. There was steel beneath the quiet surface, strength that had withstood public humiliation and emerged unbroken, mystery that didn't quite fit with their expectations of someone from the serving class. As the feast resumed its normal rhythms, conversations gradually returning to safer topics of politics and trade, Ilara felt the mate bond pulse with warm approval from across the hall. The Alpha King had defended her, protected her, risked political complications to ensure she received justice rather than persecution. But even as gratitude warmed her chest, she understood the cost of what had transpired. Lady Cordelia would not forgive or forget this humiliation. The next attack would be more careful, more vicious, more certain to achieve its goal. And there would be a next attack, as surely as winter followed autumn. The golden thread that connected her to the Alpha King hummed with complex emotions she couldn't quite interpret. Protective fury mixing with something deeper, something that spoke of recognition and claim, and the kind of possessive intensity that could reshape kingdoms if given the chance. He had seen her worth when the entire hall was prepared to watch her destruction, had stood between her and the cruelty of noble politics without regard for his own diplomatic interests. For the first time in her life, someone had looked at her and chosen to fight. The first light of dawn painted the forest in silver and shadow as Kieran made his way back to the clearing where everything had changed. His wolf had given him no peace through the long night, pacing and clawing with desperate urgency that spoke of secrets buried just beneath the surface of understanding. The mate bond pulled at his chest like a golden chain, connecting him to the servant girl who had shown more dignity under attack than most nobles displayed in their finest moments. But it was more than the bond driving him back to this place. It was the scent of ancient magic that clung to the earth here, power so old and pure it made his supernatural senses sing with recognition. Whatever Ilara had been guarding in this clearing for 15 years, it was connected to bloodlines that predated the current political order, mysteries that could reshape everything he thought he understood about power and heritage in the 7 territories. His wolf guided him to the exact spot where he had found her the day before, nose pressed to disturbed earth that still carried traces of her tears, her desperate fear, her absolute devotion to protecting something she didn't understand. He knelt beside the ancient oak tree, running his hands over ground that felt different from the surrounding forest, charged with energy that made his fingertips tingle. There, his supernatural senses locked onto something buried deeper than her hiding place had been, something that called to the alpha blood in his veins with unmistakable authority. He began to dig with his bare hands, claws extending to tear through packed earth and tangled roots, following instincts older than memory. The ornate silver box emerged from the soil like a revelation, its surface covered in symbols that seemed to shift and dance in the morning light. Ancient runes marked the lid, their meaning lost to time, but their power still radiating through the metal with enough force to make his wolf bow its head in recognition. This was sacred. This was royal. This was proof of bloodlines that the history books claimed had been destroyed generations ago. Inside the box, nested in silk that had somehow remained pristine despite decades in the earth, lay the most beautiful necklace he had ever seen. Silver chains wove together in patterns that hurt to look at directly, supporting a pendant that blazed with inner light despite the absence of any obvious gemstones. Ancient magic pulsed through the metal, royal power so concentrated it made the very air tremble around it. The moment his fingers touched the silver, visions exploded through his consciousness like lightning strikes. He saw great halls filled with wolves, bowing before queens who commanded both beast and magic with equal skill. He witnessed ceremonies where mate bonds blazed with golden light visible to entire packs, sacred unions blessed by powers older than the moon. He watched desperate flight through burning forests as a silver-haired queen carried her infant daughter toward an uncertain future, royal treasures hidden and scattered to prevent their destruction by conquering enemies. and he saw alpha kings of his own bloodline kneeling before silver lunar queens, acknowledging their sovereignty with the kind of reverence reserved for those blessed by forces beyond ordinary understanding. His ancestors had served these queens, had sworn oaths of protection and alliance that bound their bloodlines across generations. The truth hit him like a physical blow, understanding crashing over him with devastating certainty. Ilara wasn't just his mate. She was the lost heir to the silver lunar bloodline, rightful queen of territories that had been divided and conquered decades before his birth. The servant girl who scrubbed floors and endured cruelty was the most powerful wolf alive, royal blood flowing in veins that had been taught to believe they carried nothing of value. His hands shook as he lifted the necklace from its resting place, ancient power responding to his touch with warm recognition. This was why his wolf had been going insane since his arrival, why the mate bond had snapped into place with such devastating force, why every instinct bred into his bloodline across countless generations screamed that she belonged to him and he to her. She outranked him. By blood, by birthright, by the ancient laws that governed supernatural hierarchies, Ilara commanded authority that made his alpha status seem insignificant. The political alliance he had come to secure, the marriage arrangement with Lady Cordelia, the careful balance of power he had spent months negotiating, all of it became meaningless in the face of this revelation. He carefully returned the necklace to its box, mind racing with the implications of what he had discovered. The silver lunar bloodline wasn't extinct. Their lost queen lived and breathed and endured humiliation in a castle that should have been kneeling at her feet. And she had been guarding the proof of her heritage without understanding what it meant, protecting royal treasures with the devotion of someone bred to serve rather than rule. Back in the castle's archives, Kieran spread ancient texts across dusty tables with the systematic precision of someone conducting the most important research of his life. Pack historians had accompanied him south, scholars who specialised in bloodline verification and supernatural law. What they found in the crumbling records confirmed his worst fears and greatest hopes with terrifying accuracy. "Your Majesty," his chief historian breathed, finger-tracing genealogical charts that hadn't been consulted in decades. "This is extraordinary. If these records are accurate, if the Silver Lunar bloodline truly survived the Northern Conquest, then the political landscape of our entire world needs to be reconsidered." "Explain," Kieran commanded, though he already knew what the man would find. The visions had shown him enough to understand the magnitude of what they were dealing with. The Silver Lunar Queens held dominion over all 7 territories before the Great War, the historian continued, voice growing more excited with each discovery. Their bloodline carried magic that could command ancient castle defences, wolves that could shift at will regardless of moon phase, mating bonds that blazed with visible light as mark of divine blessing. They were sovereigns, Your Majesty, not just rulers of a single territory, but queens acknowledged by all the major bloodlines as supreme authority. And if one survived, she would outrank everyone, the historian said simply, including you, Your Majesty. The ancient pacts signed by your ancestors sworn loyalty to the Silver Lunar bloodline in perpetuity. Those oaths don't expire simply because the queens disappeared from public view. Kieran stared at documents that reshaped everything he thought he understood about power and politics and the careful alliances that kept their world stable. The servant girl who had been accused of theft the night before was actually the rightful sovereign of lands that stretched from the northern mountains to the southern seas. Lady Cordelia's political value, her father's territorial holdings, the marriage alliance that had brought him to this castle, all of it paled in comparison to the significance of a bloodline that commanded supernatural authority older than memory. "There's more, Your Majesty," the historian said quietly, producing a scroll that bore official seals from multiple territories. "The ancient laws are quite clear about Silver Lunar inheritance. The bloodline passes through the female line, and any wolf who bonds with a Silver Lunar queen becomes her consort, not her equal." The mating bond itself serves as both recognition of her sovereignty and acceptance of subordinate status. The words should have stung his alpha pride, should have made his wolf rebel against the suggestion of anything less than absolute dominance. Instead, he felt only rightness, the satisfaction of pieces falling into place in a puzzle he hadn't even known he was solving. His beast had recognized her authority from the moment they met, had submitted to her presence with the instinctive knowledge that some powers transcended ordinary pack hierarchies. Subordinate, he repeated thoughtfully, testing the word against his understanding of what he felt when he looked at her. Not weakness, not diminishment, partnership with someone whose strength complemented his own, whose power elevated them both beyond what either could achieve alone. The historical accounts suggest it was symbiotic, the historian offered carefully. Silver lunar queens chose consorts based on strength and compatibility, wolves who could match their power without threatening their sovereignty. The resulting partnerships were said to be extraordinarily strong, bonds that created ruling pairs capable of commanding absolute loyalty from their subjects. Kieran closed his eyes, feeling the mate bond pulse with golden warmth in his chest. Everything made sense now. The recognition that had blazed between them, the way his protective instincts overrode political calculation whenever she was threatened, the certainty that she belonged to him and he to her, despite every rational argument against such a connection. She was his queen, not just his mate, but his sovereign, the ruler his bloodline had been bred to serve and protect across generations of forgotten history. And she didn't even know. The thought of her enduring another day of servitude, of Lady Cordelia's cruelty, of the casual dismissal that treated royal blood like it carried no worth at all, made his wolf snarl with protective fury. She needed to understand what she was, needed to claim the power that was her birthright, needed to take her rightful place in a world that had forgotten how to recognize true nobility. But first, she needed to survive the political storm that would erupt when the truth came to light. Lady Cordelia would not simply step aside gracefully when she learned that her political triumph had been destroyed by the revelation of bloodlines that predated her father's holdings by centuries. The established noble families would resist having their carefully constructed hierarchies overturned by someone they had been taught to see as worthless. And Ilara herself. How did you tell someone that everything they believed about their identity was wrong? That they weren't nobody, weren't nothing, weren't a servant born to endure humiliation and cruelty, that they were actually the most powerful wolf alive, heir to a throne that commanded respect from every major bloodline in the known world. He carefully packed the ancient necklace in a wooden box lined with silk, handling it with the reverence due to royal regalia. Tomorrow would bring new complications as the truth began to emerge. Political calculations would shift like sand, and the servant girl who scrubbed floors would have to choose between the safety of invisibility and the dangerous glory of claiming her birthright. But tonight he would find a way to speak with her privately, to begin preparing her for revelations that would change both their lives forever. The mate bond hummed with anticipation and protectiveness, and something deeper than either, the recognition of destiny unfolding exactly as ancient powers had always intended. His queen was alive. His queen was within reach. And soon, very soon, the world would remember why the silver lunar bloodline had commanded such reverence from wolves who understood the true meaning of power. The private chambers that had been prepared for the Alpha King reflected the wealth and power of Lord Aldrich's house, silk tapestries and polished wood, speaking of generations of carefully accumulated influence. But Kieran barely noticed the luxury surrounding him as he paced before the tall windows, the ornate wooden box containing Ilara's birthright clutched in hands that trembled with the weight of what he was about to reveal. A soft knock at the door made his wolf lift its head with predatory attention. "Enter!" he commanded, voice carrying the supernatural authority that made submission inevitable. Ilara stepped into the chamber like a frightened deer entering a wolf's den, her eyes fixed on the floor as she had been trained since childhood. "Your Majesty, you summoned me. How may I serve you?" The words cut through him like silver blades, each humble syllable a reminder of how thoroughly she had been taught to diminish herself, to believe that servitude was her natural state, rather than the cruel suppression of royal blood that deserved reverence from every wolf in the 7 territories. "Look at me," he said softly, setting the wooden box on a nearby table where candlelight could catch the ancient symbols carved into its surface. "Please, I need you to look at me, Alara." She raised her eyes with visible reluctance, and the moment their gazes locked, the mate bond flared between them like golden lightning. He saw confusion in those depths, wariness born of a lifetime of learning that attention from powerful men meant danger for someone of her supposed station. But beneath the fear, he glimpsed something else. Strength, the kind of inner steel that had allowed her to maintain dignity under public attack, to endure 15 years of cruelty without breaking completely. "Do you know what this is?" he asked quietly, lifting the wooden box and holding it where she could see the intricate carvings that covered its surface. Ilara's breath caught as recognition flickered across her features, memory stirring of a dying woman pressing something precious into her small hands with desperate urgency. Where did you find that?" "In the forest clearing where you've been keeping vigil for 15 years, Kieran said gently, watching as shock and terror warred in her expression. "Buried deeper than your hiding place, protected by magic that responded to my bloodline because my ancestors swore oaths to serve the power contained within this box." He opened the lid with careful reverence, revealing the necklace that blazed with inner light despite the absence of external illumination. Ancient silver caught the candle flame and threw it back in patterns that seemed to move and shift, royal power so concentrated it made the very air around them tremble with supernatural energy. Ilara staggered backward as if struck, hands pressed to her chest where the mate bond pulsed with sudden intensity. "That's impossible. I buried it. I've kept it safe, kept it hidden, just like she told me to. No one was supposed to find it. No one was supposed to know." "The woman who gave it to you," Kieran said quietly, moving closer despite her obvious fear. "Tell me about her again. Everything you remember, every detail, no matter how small." "She was dying," Ilara whispered, tears gathering in her eyes as memory pulled her back to that terrible night 15 years ago. Beautiful, with silver hair that caught moonlight like water and eyes the colour of starlight, she appeared in the forest bleeding from wounds I didn't understand, barely conscious but fighting to stay alive long enough to give me something. What did she say to you? Her exact words?" Ilara closed her eyes, voice becoming distant as she relived the moment that had shaped her entire life. "She said I had to keep it hidden, that they would kill me if they knew what I was. She made me promise to never let them find it, to never let them know." Her voice broke on the final words. "To never let them know what I am." "And what are you, Ilara?" Kieran asked gently, opening a leather portfolio filled with genealogical charts and ancient documents that his historians had recovered from the castle's forgotten archives. "According to these records, according to bloodline documentation that dates back 300 years, what are you?" She shook her head frantically, backing toward the door as if she could escape the truth by putting distance between herself and the evidence. "I'm nobody. I'm nothing. I'm a servant girl who scrubs floors and empties chamber pots and gets accused of stealing rings I would never touch. I don't have bloodlines or heritage or anything that matters." "These documents say otherwise," Kieran said quietly, spreading the charts across a table where candlelight could illuminate the carefully recorded names and dates that connected her to powers she had never been allowed to claim. "They say you are Ilara Luna, rightful heir to the Silver Luna bloodline, queen by birth to territories that stretch from the northern mountains to the southern seas." The words hung between them like a death sentence, truth so large and impossible that her mind seemed to recoil from accepting it. She stared at the genealogical charts as if they were written in a language she couldn't read, unable to process information that contradicted everything she had been taught about her place in the world. "Queen," she repeated finally, voice barely above a whisper. "You're saying that I should be—" "The most powerful wolf alive," Kieran confirmed gently. "Heir to magic that could command ancient castle defences, bloodline that carried authority over all the major territories, sovereign by right of birth and supernatural blessing. The woman who gave you the necklace wasn't a dying stranger, Ilara. She was the previous Silver Luna Queen, your mother, fleeing the destruction of her court with nothing but hope that her infant daughter might survive to reclaim what was lost." Ilara sank onto a nearby chair, as if her legs could no longer support her weight, staring at him with the expression of someone whose entire reality had just been shattered. "My mother, the Silver Luna Queen, that's not possible. I would know, I would remember. There would have been signs, power, something that marked me as different." "There were signs," Kieran said softly, moving to kneel beside her chair so they were at eye level. "Your wolf stirring when it shouldn't, doors opening at your touch without keys, the way you've survived 15 years of cruelty that should have broken someone without royal strength flowing in their veins. You suppressed it all, learned to hide it so thoroughly that even you forgot what you were capable of." "I don't understand," she whispered, hands trembling as she reached toward the necklace with the reverence of someone touching something sacred. "If this is true, if I'm really, why didn't anyone recognize me? Why was I allowed to live as a servant when I should have been?" "Because your mother was very clever," Kieran explained, producing documents that showed the careful web of lies that had been constructed around Ilara's identity. "She arranged for you to be found by people who would keep you safe but ignorant, who would raise you as a servant rather than a threat to those who had conquered her territories. Your power was suppressed through potions administered in your food, magic that made you forget what you were while keeping you alive." Ilara's eyes widened as understanding dawned, pieces clicking into place with devastating clarity. "The cook always insisted I eat certain meals, said they were good for growing girls, would make me strong, but they made me feel distant, like I was wrapped in wool, muffled from things I should have been able to sense." "Suppression magic," Kieran confirmed. "Designed to keep your power dormant while you matured, to prevent anyone from recognizing what you truly were until you were old enough to survive the revelation. But the effects have been wearing off as you reach full adulthood, which is why your wolf has been stirring, why the mate bond blazed so brightly when we met." She was quiet for a long moment, absorbing information that rewrote every assumption she had ever made about herself, her worth, her place in a world that had taught her she deserved nothing. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a tremor that spoke of terror and wonder warring in equal measure. "If this is true," she whispered, "if I'm really who you say I am, then everything changes. The alliance you came here to make, Lady Cordelia's political triumph, the careful balance that keeps these territories stable, all of it becomes—" "Irrelevant," Kieran finished quietly. "Your bloodline predates every current ruling family by centuries. You outrank everyone, including me. The ancient pacts sworn by my ancestors acknowledged Silver Luna sovereignty over all 7 territories. From a legal standpoint, from a supernatural standpoint, you have more right to rule than anyone currently sitting on a throne." Ilara stood abruptly, pacing to the window where moonlight painted the forest in silver, the same forest where she had kept vigil over her heritage for 15 years, without understanding what she protected. "But I don't know how to be a queen. I don't know anything about ruling or politics or commanding the kind of respect that nobles expect. I'm terrified of Lady Cordelia, frightened of drawing attention from people who could destroy me without a second thought." "You stood up to her last night," Kieran reminded her gently. "In front of the entire assembly of southern nobility, you maintained dignity and strength that impressed everyone who witnessed it. You have the spirit of a queen, Ilara. You've simply been taught to suppress it." "This is insane," she breathed, pressing her palms against the cool glass as if it could anchor her to reality. "Yesterday I was scrubbing floors. Today you're telling me I'm supposed to be ruling kingdoms. How does someone make that kind of transition? How does someone go from being invisible to being—" "Magnificent," Kieran said simply, rising to join her at the window. "Because that's what you are, what you've always been. The necklace didn't make you royal, Ilara. It simply proved what was already written in your blood, your bones, your soul. You were born to command respect, to inspire loyalty, to lead with the kind of strength that comes from understanding both power and compassion." She turned to face him, tears tracking silver paths down her cheeks. "And what about you? What about the alliance you need, the political stability that depends on your marriage to Lady Cordelia? If I claim this heritage, if I accept what you're telling me is true, I destroy everything you came here to accomplish." Kieran reached out slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, before cupping her face in hands that trembled with the magnitude of what he was about to confess. "You don't destroy anything, my queen. You complete everything. The mate bond isn't just romantic connection, it's political alliance. By ancient law, by supernatural decree, I don't serve Lady Cordelia's father or secure his territories through marriage. I serve you. I always have, even before I knew you existed." "I don't want to be a queen," she whispered, the confession torn from her throat like blood. "I don't want the responsibility, the danger, the weight of entire territories depending on my decisions. I just want to be left alone, to be safe, to not have to worry about people like Lady Cordelia destroying me for political gain." "I know," Kieran said softly, thumbs brushing away tears that spoke of a lifetime of learning to expect the worst from those in power. "But wanting and destiny don't always align. You can choose to remain hidden, to suppress your power and live as a servant for the rest of your life. But that choice won't protect you from enemies who are already beginning to suspect that you're more than you appear. Lady Cordelia saw something last night that threatened her plans, and she won't stop until she eliminates that threat." Ilara closed her eyes, leaning into his touch, despite everything that screamed such intimacy was impossible between someone of her supposed station and the most powerful man in 7 territories. "What happens if I put on the necklace? If I claim this heritage you say belongs to me?" "Everything changes," Kieran said honestly. "Your power awakens fully. Your wolf emerges from suppression. You become who you were always meant to be, with all the strength and responsibility that entails. And everyone who has spent their lives believing they could dismiss you, diminish you, destroy you, learns exactly how wrong they were." She was quiet for a long moment, feeling the mate bond pulse between them with warmth that spoke of partnership, protection, love that transcended political calculation. When she opened her eyes, he saw something new in their depths. Not acceptance, not yet, but possibility, the first fragile stirring of a queen learning to claim her crown. "Show me," she whispered, voice steady despite the fear that made her hands shake. "Show me what I become when I stop pretending to be nothing." The ancient necklace felt impossibly heavy in Ilara's hands, silver metal warming under her touch as power that had been dormant for 15 years began to stir in response to her acceptance. The moment the chains settled around her throat, the world exploded into brilliant clarity that made her gasp with the suddenness of awakening. Her wolf surged to the surface with a roar of recognition that echoed through dimensions she hadn't known existed, supernatural senses expanding beyond anything she had ever imagined possible. She could feel every heartbeat in the castle, sense the dreams and fears of sleeping servants 3 floors below, taste the political tension that crackled through the noble quarters like electricity before a storm. "Breathe." Kieran's voice reached her through the chaos of sensation, his hands steady on her shoulders as royal power flooded through veins that had been suppressed for too long. "Let it flow through you. Don't fight it. You're safe. I'm here." The necklace blazed with silver light that filled the chamber, ancient magic recognizing its rightful bearer and responding with joy that manifested as pure radiance. Ilara felt herself changing, not physically but fundamentally, as if layers of imposed limitation were being stripped away to reveal the truth that had always existed beneath. Her posture straightened without conscious thought, the habitual slouch of someone trying to remain invisible replaced by the natural grace of someone born to command respect. Her voice, when she spoke, carried harmonics that hadn't been there moments before, supernatural authority weaving through words that suddenly seemed capable of compelling obedience from anyone who heard them. "I can feel everything," she whispered, golden eyes widening as awareness expanded to encompass the entire castle and beyond. "Every stone in these walls, every breath drawn by everyone inside them, it's like I'm connected to the very foundations of this place." The silver lunar bloodline was tied to the ancient defensive magic, Kieran explained, watching with fascination as power awakened in the woman who had scrubbed these floors just hours ago. "Your ancestors built the original keep using supernatural techniques that bound the castle's defences to their bloodline. The stones recognise you, Ilara. They know their true mistress has returned." She moved to the window with fluid grace that spoke of predatory confidence, looking out over lands that suddenly felt different, as if she was seeing them through new eyes. The forest where she had kept her vigil for 15 years stretched beneath moonlight that seemed to bend toward her, acknowledging royal blood that commanded even the celestial bodies. "The invisibility," she said suddenly, understanding flooding through her as pieces clicked into place. "All those years of being overlooked, dismissed, treated as if I barely existed. It wasn't just because I was a servant, it was power, wasn't it? Unconscious magic making people's attention slide away from me." "Self-preservation," Kieran confirmed, moving to stand beside her at the window. "Your suppressed wolf found ways to protect you, even when you didn't understand what was happening. The more dangerous your situation became, the more thoroughly you disappeared from notice. It kept you alive when recognition would have meant death." Ilara lifted her hand, watching silver light play across her fingers, as royal magic responded to her will for the first time in her conscious memory. "And now? Now you're exactly what you were always meant to be," he said softly. "Magnificent, powerful, royal in every sense of the word. The question is what you choose to do with what you've reclaimed." Before she could answer, supernatural senses that had been awakened by the necklace screamed a warning that made her entire body go rigid with alarm. Danger. Close and immediate and focused, with lethal intent on eliminating threats to carefully laid political plans. "Someone's coming," she breathed, new awareness tracking movement through the castle corridors with predatory precision. Multiple someones armed, moving toward these chambers with purpose that feels violent. Kieran's expression hardened as his own supernatural senses confirmed what hers had detected. Golden eyes blazing with protective fury that made his wolf snarl beneath the surface. Lady Cordelia's escalation. She must have been watching, must have seen you enter my chambers, and decided the threat you represent requires immediate action. "They mean to kill us both," Ilara said with certainty that came from royal blood recognizing assassination attempts with ancient wisdom. "Make it look like a crime of passion. A servant girl who seduced the Alpha King and paid the price for her presumption. Lady Cordelia will be the grieving almost mate who discovered our indiscretion just moments too late to prevent tragedy." The sound of careful footsteps in the corridor beyond confirmed their worst fears. Multiple sets of feet moving with the practiced silence of professionals who specialized in making problems disappear. Lady Cordelia had moved beyond political maneuvering to direct action, calculating that eliminating both the Alpha King and the mysterious servant who had captured his attention would clear her path to power more effectively than any negotiation. "Can you fight?" Kieran asked quietly, supernatural awareness tracking their enemy's approach, while his wolf prepared for violence that would reshape the political landscape of the Southern Territories. Elara closed her eyes, feeling power flow through her like liquid fire as the necklace responded to mortal danger by awakening capabilities that had been bred into her bloodline across generations of queens who had ruled through both wisdom and strength. When she opened them again, Kieran saw something that made his breath catch in recognition. This was not the frightened servant girl who had cowered under Lady Cordelia's accusations. This was a queen discovering her claws, royal blood awakening to face threats with the kind of lethal grace that had made the Silver Luna bloodline legendary among supernatural historians. "I can fight," she said simply, voice carrying harmonic undertones that spoke of magic preparing to defend its vessel. I think I've always known how. I just forgot I was allowed to." The chamber door burst open with explosive violence, armed figures flooding through the entrance, with weapons designed to kill quickly and quietly. But they had expected to find a distracted Alpha King and a cowering servant girl, easy targets who would die without resistance. Instead, they faced something that made ancient instincts scream warnings about powers that transcended ordinary understanding. Elara moved like silver lightning, royal magic enhancing speed and strength beyond anything merely physical. Her hand swept toward the nearest assassin, and he flew backward into the stone wall with enough force to crack both bone and mortar. Power blazed around her like visible flame, the necklace responding to combat by amplifying every supernatural capability bred into her bloodline. Kieran shifted into the fluid violence of an alpha defending his mate, but even his legendary combat skills seemed almost secondary to the display of royal fury that turned the chamber into a battlefield where ancient magic rewrote the rules of engagement. Elara fought with instincts that came from generations of queens who had protected their territories through personal strength as much as political wisdom. "Impossible!" one of the assassins gasped as supernatural power crushed his weapon to useless metal. "She's just a servant. She's nobody." "I am the Silver Luna Queen," Elara replied, with regal authority that made the very stones of the castle tremble in recognition. "And you have made a grave error in judgment." Silver light exploded outward from the necklace, ancient defensive magic recognizing that its bearer was under attack within her own ancestral territory. The castle's foundations responded to royal blood with protective fury that had been dormant since the original queens had walked these halls, stone walls becoming weapons that turned against anyone who threatened their true mistress. The surviving assassins found themselves trapped by architecture that suddenly seemed alive, corridors that shifted to prevent escape, doors that sealed with supernatural strength that made flight impossible. They had come to commit quiet murder and instead found themselves facing the awakened power of a bloodline that had ruled these lands for centuries before their employers had been born. "Lady Cordelia sent you," Elara said with certainty that came from royal intuition, reading guilt in their thoughts. She calculated that removing both the Alpha King and the mysterious servant who had captured his attention would secure her political triumph. One of the assassins, braver or more foolish than his companions, raised his remaining weapon with desperate defiance. "She'll have her alliance, she'll have her crown, and you'll be nothing but a memory that died quietly in the night." "Crown?" Elara repeated thoughtfully, silver light playing around her as royal power consolidated into forms that made the air itself seem to bow in recognition. "Yes, I suppose it is time I reclaimed what was always mine." She raised her hand, and every window in the chamber blew outward simultaneously, glass exploding into the night as power that had been suppressed for too long finally found full expression. The sound echoed across the castle grounds like a declaration of war, announcing that the Silver Luna bloodline had returned to claim dominion over territories that had forgotten how to kneel before true royalty. In chambers throughout the noble quarters, sleeping lords and ladies jolted awake to supernatural pressure that spoke of fundamental changes in the political order they had thought was settled. Lady Cordelia sat upright in her bed, perfect face twisted with fury, as she realized her assassination attempt had not only failed, but had triggered something far more dangerous than she had anticipated. The servant girl was gone. In her place stood something that made ancient bloodlines remember why they had once sworn oaths of fealty to queens whose power transcended ordinary understanding of authority and command. Ilara Luna had awakened, and the 7 territories would never be the same. The great hall fell into stunned silence as Ilara descended the grand staircase with regal grace that transformed every step into a declaration of sovereignty. The ancient necklace blazed against her throat like captured starlight, silver chains catching the torchlight and throwing it back in patterns that seemed to pulse with their own heartbeat. Power radiated from her in waves that made every supernatural being present feel the weight of bloodline authority they had been taught to believe was extinct. Lady Cordelia stood frozen beside her father's throne, perfect composure cracking as she stared at the servant girl who had somehow become something that defied every assumption about power and hierarchy in their carefully ordered world. The assassins she had sent to eliminate threats to her political triumph lay bound by supernatural force in the corridor above, their failure now catastrophically obvious to everyone assembled in the hall. Impossible! Lord Aldrich breathed, rising from his seat with the kind of shocked recognition that spoke of buried memories stirring to life. That necklace, those symbols, they belonged to bloodlines that were destroyed generations ago. Not destroyed, Ilara said clearly, her voice carrying through the hall with harmonic authority that made stone walls tremble in recognition. Hidden, suppressed, forced to endure humiliation and cruelty while the world forgot what real power looked like. Her golden eyes swept the assembly with predatory grace, taking in nobles who had spent their lives believing they commanded respect through birth and wealth. But I remember now, and the ancient laws remember, and the 7 territories will remember why they once knelt before the silver lunar crown. Kieran moved to stand beside her, his presence shifting from independent alpha to protective consort as the mate bond blazed between them like golden fire. The political alliance he had come to secure, the marriage arrangement that was supposed to stabilize the southern territories, the careful balance of power that had been negotiated over months of diplomatic manoeuvring, all of it became meaningless in the face of royal blood that commanded authority older than any current ruling house. "Your Majesty," he said formally, the title carrying weight that made several nobles gasp in recognition of what they were witnessing. "The territories await your command." Lady Cordelia's perfect features twisted with fury that burned away her careful political mask, revealing the vicious calculation that had driven her to order assassination rather than accept defeat. "This is madness. She's a servant, a nobody who scrubs floors and empties chamber pots. You can't seriously believe that putting on some old jewellery makes her worthy of— Kneel!" The command hit the assembly like a physical force, royal authority backing the single word with enough supernatural power to make submission inevitable for anyone who recognized the true hierarchy of their world. Ancient magic woven into the very foundations of the castle responded to its rightful mistress, stone walls amplifying her voice until it seemed to come from the earth itself. Several of the older nobles dropped to their knees without conscious thought, bloodline memories older than politics, compelling recognition of sovereignty that transcended current power structures. Lord Aldrich himself swayed as instincts bred into his family across generations warred with the careful lies he had been taught about the natural order of their world. But Lady Cordelia remained standing, defiance blazing in her blue eyes as she faced the destruction of everything she had planned and schemed to achieve. "I will not kneel to a pretender. I will not bow to someone who thinks ancient trinkets can replace legitimate political authority." "Then you will learn the difference between legitimate authority and stolen power," Ilara replied with regal calm that carried undertones of lethal promise. The Silver Lunar bloodline ruled these territories for 300 years before your family claimed lordship over lands that were never theirs to hold. Every treaty, every alliance, every political arrangement made in defiance of royal sovereignty becomes void the moment I reclaim my birthright. She raised her hand, and the ancient defensive systems built into the castle's foundation responded with visible manifestation of power that had been dormant since the original queens had walked these halls. Light flowed through stone channels carved centuries ago, creating patterns of protection and command that turned architecture into weapons controlled by royal will. The poison that suppressed my power for 15 years, Ilara continued, supernatural awareness revealing secrets that had been hidden in plain sight. Administered daily through meals prepared by servants who believed they were protecting a child rather than imprisoning a queen. Who gave those orders, Lord Aldrich? Who decided that royal blood should be diminished rather than destroyed? Lord Aldrich's face went ashen as understanding crashed over him like cold water, memories of carefully buried arrangements surfacing despite decades of willful ignorance. Your mother came to us dying, begging us to keep you safe. She said enemies would hunt you if they knew what you were, that hiding your identity was the only way to ensure survival until you were strong enough to reclaim what was yours. And yet you chose to keep me weak, Ilara said quietly, pain flickering beneath royal composure as she processed the magnitude of betrayal that had shaped her entire existence. You chose to let me believe I was worthless rather than prepare me for the responsibilities I would one day inherit. You chose political convenience over the oath your family swore to serve the Silver Lunar crown. We kept you alive, Lord Aldrich protested, desperation making his voice crack with strain. Do you have any idea what would have happened if word spread that the Silver Lunar heir had survived? Every enemy of the old order would have come for you. Every ambitious lord would have tried to use you for their own political gain. We protected you the only way we knew how. By teaching me to hate myself, Ilara replied, with devastating calm. By allowing your daughter to humiliate me for sport. By standing silent while I was treated as less than nothing in halls that should have been mine by right of birth. Protection that required the destruction of my sense of worth was not protection at all, my lord. It was cowardice disguised as mercy. Lady Cordelia stepped forward with the desperate fury of someone watching their carefully constructed world crumble beyond repair. Even if this is true, even if you are who you claim to be, it changes nothing. The political realities of our world don't bow to ancient bloodlines. Power comes from alliances, from armies, from the support of those who control resources and territory. Does it? Ilara asked mildly, turning her attention to the woman who had orchestrated assassination attempts and public humiliation with equal enthusiasm. Then perhaps it's time you learned what real power looks like. She closed her eyes, reaching out through connections that royal blood had maintained with the land itself even during years of suppression and denial. The forest responded first, ancient trees bending toward the castle as if acknowledging their sovereign's awakening. Then the streams and rivers, waters changing course to flow in patterns that spelled recognition in languages older than human speech. But it was the wolves that answered her call with the most devastating effect. Every pack within 50 miles felt the pull of royal blood summoning them home, supernatural authority that transcended territorial boundaries and political arrangements. They came through the darkness like silver shadows, filling the castle grounds with enough supernatural presence to make the very air tremble with acknowledgement of returned sovereignty. The alliance you sought to secure through marriage, Ilara said to Kieran, though her words carried clearly to every noble present, was based on the assumption that Lord Aldrich controlled territories that belonged to him by right of conquest. But conquest can only claim what was never legitimately held. These lands, these pacts, these ancient defensive systems, all of it belongs to the Silver Lunar Crown, has always belonged to the Silver Lunar Crown. Your marriage to his daughter would have been meaningless because he never had the authority to offer what was already mine. Lady Cordelia's perfect composure finally shattered completely, revealing the desperate fury that had driven her to increasingly violent measures as her political triumph slipped away. "I will not let some pretender destroy everything I've worked for. I will not be displaced by someone who spent her life scrubbing floors." She lunged forward with a blade that had been concealed in her silk gown, desperation making her attempt direct violence when political manoeuvring had failed to secure her goals. But royal blood carried reflexes that had been honed across generations of queens who had survived through personal strength as much as political wisdom. Ilara moved with fluid grace that turned aside the attack while barely seeming to notice the threat. Supernatural awareness making Lady Cordelia's assault appear almost comically slow. Her hand caught Lady Cordelia's wrist with strength that cracked bone, royal power constraining violence with the kind of effortless dominance that spoke of fundamental differences in capability. "The difference between us," Ilara said quietly, holding Lady Cordelia immobile while silver light blazed from the ancient necklace, "is not that I scrubbed floors while you wore silk. The difference is that I learned strength through adversity while you learned cruelty through privilege. I understand both power and compassion because I have lived without either. You understand neither because you have never been without both." She released Lady Cordelia, who collapsed to the stone floor with a sob of fury and defeat that echoed through the suddenly silent hall. The blade clattered away across ancient stones that had witnessed the rise and fall of dynasties, its failure marking the end of political arrangements that had never carried legitimate authority. "The silver lunar crown recognises no political marriages made in defiance of royal sovereignty," Ilara announced, her voice carrying the weight of law that superseded every treaty and alliance signed during the years of her exile. "All territorial claims based on conquest rather than legitimate inheritance are hereby voided. All oaths sworn in denial of ancient pacts are released. The 7 territories return to their rightful governance under bloodline authority that answers to powers older than political convenience." She turned to face Kieran, the mate bond blazing between them like golden fire as supernatural recognition confirmed what political reality had already made clear. "The Alpha King of the Northern Territories presents himself before the silver lunar throne. What oath do you offer in service to restored royal authority?" Kieran knelt before her with grace that spoke of genuine reverence rather than political calculation, golden eyes blazing with recognition of sovereignty that transcended every arrangement he had come to secure. "I offer my strength, my loyalty, and my love to the rightful queen of the 7 territories. I renounce all previous alliances in favour of the bond that connects us across time, destiny, and the ancient laws that govern supernatural mating." "And I accept your oath," Ilara replied formally, the necklace flaring with silver light that filled the hall and announced to every supernatural being within 100 miles that the silver lunar bloodline had reclaimed its birthright. "Let it be recorded in the ancient books that the Northern and Southern territories are united not through political marriage, but through the mating bond blessed by powers that predate all human arrangements." The great hall fell silent as the magnitude of change settled over nobles who had spent their lives believing they understood how power worked in their world. Everything had shifted in the space of a single evening, careful political arrangements crumbling before the awakening of bloodline authority that commanded recognition from forces beyond ordinary understanding. In the centre of it all, the servant girl who had scrubbed these very stones that morning stood transformed into something that made ancient legends seem pale by comparison. She was no longer nobody. She was no longer nothing. She was exactly what she had always been, finally free to shine with the light that had been hidden beneath suppression and lies and the cruel assumption that worth could be determined by circumstances rather than birth. The Silver Lunar Queen had returned, and the 7 territories would kneel before her crown or learn the cost of defying powers that had ruled these lands since wolves first learned to shift beneath the moon.